will struggle to pull themselves out of. Move in the right direction. Take one step forward and let go of what's going to happen.
Go when you had the answer and you were there alone. You left the door unopened when you knew that you would want more. Give it up, give it away while you were barely aware. You let that day cut off so much hardly remain. While you knew that there was still a way. This is your only plan. Oh, now this is your only. Now this is your only plan. Oh, now this is yours. Force it to yield, you'll forge it to the lines. You let your callous be your shield, and everyone will say that it all was finished years ago, but you will stay, and you won't ever let it go. When you had the answer and you were there alone, you left the door unopened when you knew that you would want more. Then again you found the answer and you were there alone. You left the door unopened when you knew that you would want more. When you had the answer and you were there alone, you left the door unopened when you knew that you would want more. Then again you found the answer and you were there alone. You left the door unopened when you knew that you would want more. Well, I lost my phone maybe 3 years back, and I don't have an address, it's a matter of fact. But I guess you tried to drop me a line. Yeah, I signed out and I unsubscribed, then I cut the cord. Now I'm not online, but I'll be fine. Yeah, I guess that I'll get by. Well, I shaved my head and I grew out a beard, and now I only wear plaid. I always lick, I steer. I'm moving to LA. I'm writing a screen.
Alrighty, chat. Oh. Okay. Chat. Let's get started. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Dr. Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I am a medical professional, a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. So today we have an awesome interview with Laura DIY. We're going to be talking a little bit about her journey as a creator, her mental health challenges and triumphs. So really looking forward to that interview. Before we hop into that, we're just going to do a quick look at a couple of announcements. So first is we're going to take a look at our content calendar for the week, the month. So this is Mental Health Awareness Month. We've been doing it for a couple of years. And our theme this year is things seem to be falling apart, like the world is falling apart. So how do we manage that? We started last week with 2 interviews with Mr. Who's the Boss in Pirate Software. Dr. Ali Matu helped us out with how to break through overwhelm over on the membership side. Today we've got Laura DIY. Tomorrow is going to be a World on Fire stream. So we're going to just talk about how to manage the world when things are falling apart. On Wednesday, I'm going to be doing a more sort of hands-on stream on the membership side for how to build a social circle. We've got the week after that, resilience, and then we've got dealing with uncertainty with Dr. Thorderson. And then we've got 3 more interviews. So Chloe Shea is going to be on Thursday, and then Scotty K Fitness the week after that, and then the Botez sisters the week after that. And then I will also be answering your voicemails, debunking terrible relationship advice, and then we've got something really fun planned, which is doctors versus AI for kind of the last day. So yeah, that's what we've got. Another thing I want to just mention to y'all. So we have a community challenge, which is in case of crash out, break glass. So this is a challenge that's all about developing resilience and resilience-based skills. So we've been doing, so this is like, if y'all are not familiar, we do community challenges every year. They tend to be a lot of fun. They're excuses to go and do the things that you should be doing, right? So everyone's like, oh, I should meditate, and like, I should spend more time in nature. So this year we're going to focus all on resilience building. So if y'all are trying to figure out like, oh, how do I be more resilient? I don't know if people sit there and sit down and ask themselves that question. But if you're someone who's like struggling, right, and you're looking around at other people who seem to be able to handle difficulties better than you are able to handle them. So resilience is all about learning skills that let you, take something that would be a failure and turn it into a setback. So if we kind of think about it for a second, a failure and a setback are sort of the same thing. The only difference is whether you quit or not, right? So are you able to bounce back? Are you able to keep going? So y'all can join the Discord to check out the challenge. And then there's all kinds of different like tasks that y'all do. You collect points, and then there's different kinds of rewards that go into it, okay? Last thing we're going to talk about is we do have a promotion running right now, which is our 555 promotion. We've been doing Mental Health May for 5 years now. We've been around for 5 years. That's wild. So y'all can get $5 off of coaching if you sign up now. That sort of sticks with you throughout the duration of your package, which is quite a lot. It's $5 off each session, so every week. We also have $25 off of Dr. K's guide if y'all get the full bundle. And there was one other thing. Oh yeah, you guys get a 5-day free trial to memberships if y'all are curious about this kind of stuff, like how to build a social circle, deep dive into resilience. Y'all can kind of check out the content. There's a whole library of stuff that y'all can check out, so you can do that right now. Without further ado, let's hop in. Give me a second. So I'm going to go over here. Hello. Okay. So, you ready, Laura? Oh, Lauren, sorry. Okay, I just realized I've been mispronouncing your name. I apologize. Okay, so hello, Lauren. Welcome. Thanks for letting us, thanks for gracing us with your presence. I was about to say letting us have you, but that is not, that's not what we're doing here. I think that's going to get clipped out of context. So that's how we starting off with a failure. Yeah, sorry. People can't hear you because you're muted. Hold on. Not me. It's you. Sorry. It's not you. It's me. I muted you.
Got it.
Okay. So let me just do one or two other really quick things. Let me just make sure. So even though I don't usually read chat, sometimes it helps to have chat open in case I do things like mute you by accident. And then let me just, so it seems like volume is kind of okay. Okay. I'm going to just turn you up. Let's turn you up on Discord. Just a touch. Okay. So welcome.
Hi.
So what do you go by?
Lauren or Lore DIY.
Okay. So is it okay if I call you Lauren?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So can you start by telling us a little bit about what you do on the internet and where we can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been on YouTube for 13 years.
Wow.
I'm essentially like an internet fossil, I feel like. So I started with DIY projects, so like little do-it-yourself crafts and like how-to tutorials, and eventually transitioned into vlogging, and kind of like a lifestyle creator across all the platforms. But yeah, it's been 13 years and I'm still trucking away.
Oh, that's awesome. So when you say like lifestyle and vlogging, can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah. It's essentially like documenting parts of your life to share with your audience, I would say is like the best way to encapsulate it. So for example, I just went on a wild bachelorette in Las Vegas this past weekend for a girlfriend. And so it's like, vlogging the things that you're wearing, the things that you're doing, like unboxing different parts of like the goodie bags, etc. So it's just like, choosing to share different parts of your life with your audience.
And can you tell me about the bachelorette? What was that like?
Oh my God, honestly, I'm someone who I would feel like I think identifies as like an ambivert. So I'm not necessarily an extrovert or an introvert, but like I definitely
Hmm.
need time to recharge the social battery. There were 16 of us, girls and gays, in Las Vegas over about 3.5 days, and it was a lot. It was a lot. It was so much fun. But I'm 31 now, and my social battery is not what it was when I was in university in terms of partying and going out and drinking. I kind of like one of those people that I can really rally for a nighttime event or a daytime event, but you don't get me for both.
Okay, gotcha. I like the word rally there. It's like,
I
you have
can
to like marshal your resources and sally forth into
I can
socializing,
I can sally forth into socialization at 100% enthusiasm for a nighttime event or a daytime event, but
but not
you might
both.
get 50-50 for both.
Yeah, that's cool. And so it sounds like there were 16 people there. And what is that? I've never been to a bachelorette party in Vegas. Can you tell us a little bit? And I understand we can just check out your vlog, but what was it like?
Yeah. I mean, it was so much fun. It was a great. I would say like the bride is such a wonderfully wholesome individual that she's really attracted equally great people into her life. So shockingly, not a drip of drama. I feel like when people hear like
Mm,
16 people in Las Vegas with mixed with alcohol, you're like, oh, that sounds like an absolute nightmare. But it honestly was so wholesome and wonderful. And I feel like when you get married is one of the times in your life when everyone clears their calendar to make time and prioritize attending that event. So it was so nice.
that's great. It sounds like it was a lot of fun. What kind of stuff did y'all do?
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Magic Mike,
Yeah, a stripper show.
a stripper show essentially. Yeah, so we
Okay.
did the Magic Mike show, which honestly, like, was such an incredibly uh impressive show. Like
Hmm.
I thought it was gonna be just like, the standard like stripper, hot guys, abs, the whole, what you would expect. But it was amazing. So we did that. We did a day club. We did a nightclub, a few dinners, a PJs and Prosecco. Her maid of honor did a great job of like planning all the themes, etc. So it was like
Hmm.
mermaids and matrimony. So I know that that's not,
Hmm.
you might not find yourself at a mermaids and matrimony
Uh,
day club in Vegas, but that was the gist of it.
yeah. So what is a day club?
A day club is essentially, like a nightclub, but it's light and you're at a pool with a DJ.
Okay. That sounds so much better than a nightclub.
Honestly, it's my personal preference over a nightclub for
Hmm.
sure.
Why is that? What do you like more about the day club?
I like being in bed by 10:30 p.m.
Okay.
is essentially, if I would say, how that rounds out.
That sounds great. I too like being in bed by 10:30 p.m. Unless I'm gaming, in which case, sometimes we have late nights. But that's so interesting. So, just hearing about this, Lauren, it seems like My first reaction, like not in a bad way, is that I'm part of a different world than you are. Like my life is just very different, and like not in a bad way at all. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
really
yeah.
looking forward to understanding what your like your side, how y'all. It's like it's interacting with a foreign culture for the first
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
So
an alien
yeah,
species.
yeah, it's great. So I'm really looking forward to this. So can you tell us a little bit about just how you got to where you are? So you've been doing YouTube content. You said you're 31, so you started when you were 18, and you
Yeah.
started
So
in 2012.
mhm.
So that was like before it was cool.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Before it was cool. Before, like, yeah, yeah, way before it was cool. It was when people were doing it for a hobby. Like, I
Mm.
feel like, you know, the positioning of social media has shifted so much now,
Yep.
where a lot of people go into it being like, "Oh, I want this to be potentially my career."
Yeah.
But back then, 13 years ago, I was in my first year of university. The program that I had entered into wasn't quite as creative as I had anticipated, and so I was really just looking for a creative outlet. So I started a blog first, back when blogs were still a thing,
Hmm.
and it eventually transitioned to a YouTube channel. And I kept it up until I graduated. And by the time I graduated, I was making enough revenue for it to be my full-time career.
Wow.
Um, that was in Toronto, so I'm Canadian. So I graduated from Ryerson, which is actually it got renamed, so it's called TMU now. But graduated, got my immigration sorted, and then moved to LA about 6 months after I graduated
Okay.
and have been here ever since.
And what was growing up like for you?
Honestly, my husband roasts me for this all the time because I had such a wonderfully sheltered childhood. My parents are still together. They love each
Okay.
other. They just got back from a beautiful trip in Hawaii. I'm an only child, and I'm so lucky. I just have such an incredible relationship with my family. And I grew up in like a very communicative household.
What does that mean?
Although like I feel like I as I grew up, I realized that there were so many of my peers who never learned how to like their parents wouldn't apologize to them,
Hmm.
or they felt like they were to blame for things that went wrong in their parents' lives. Like I just feel like I was so lucky to have such my parents just had such, I guess, they my mom worked in not only healthcare but also in like management, so I feel like she was so great at dealing with people and building and flexing that muscle of people skills. So I feel like she was such a great pillar of building that communication tool within our own household as well. So when there were issues, it was never like there was never like a am I just gonna, you know, just get over this and not address it. And so I feel like that's been such a great pattern throughout my entire life from such a young age. But yeah, I was incredibly sheltered, and my parents were wonderful, and I am so so lucky because I know not everyone has that privilege.
What do you mean by sheltered?
Um like I think I never had, and again this is also too I feel just like is up to timing as well, but like I never had to process any kind of really intense trauma, or when things did go wrong I feel like my parents did a, and whether this set me up for success later on in life, but I feel like they put in a lot of effort towards sheltering me from understanding how severe something was. So my
Hmm.
mom was hospitalized when I was in maybe grade 6 or so, grade 5 maybe, with what I like later found out was like a much more serious kidney disease. And they, I feel like, withheld the truth to spare my worry and anxiety at that young of an age, maybe thinking that I wouldn't be able to understand it or process it, and they didn't want to scare me. And so I think later on, maybe it backfired a little bit because when I encountered like my very first traumas, I was like, oh my God, I don't have any tools in my tool belt to like
Hmm.
process these things. But I think that they did a really good job of feeling like everything was always okay for the most part.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so it sounds like they were very protective of you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so and then going off to college, you mentioned that you mentioned something like when things got hard for you, you felt like you may not have had the skills to handle it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had, um, I had one of my first like serious relationships. Well, what feels like you're serious when you're 17 or 18. We had been dating for maybe 5, 6 months, and he had like this big medical emergency where he had a seizure. He went into a coma for 3, 4 days, and it was like the very first time that I feel like my body really like went into shock of being like, oh my god, things are not okay after having had such what felt like a stable life beforehand of everything is okay. And so, like looking back when my mom had been sick, I think about like maybe if that had been processed differently, I would have had, some more tools to be like, oh, this is a familiar setting. I've been in a hospital before. I know what this feels like. Medical professionals, we trust them. They're very, very smart and educated.
Hmm.
But I think that that was like the very first big thing that happened to me where I was like, oh, my body doesn't know what to do with this information and how to process this.
That's such an interesting way to describe it. You said, my body doesn't know what to do with this information and how to process that. That is
Mhm.
almost something that I never hear people say. I don't know how else to put it. Like, because most people, they'll be like, oh, yeah, this happened. It sucked. Or like, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
they don't,
It was hard.
they don't use such specific language. So that
Mhm.
implies to me that you've learned a lot about this.
Oh, yeah. Years of therapy.
Yeah. So, or do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm a totally open book and have always been online about my own mental health. And I think also too a big part of vlogging because I'm quite transparent about what is happening in my life. Sometimes includes a recap of a panic attack that I had on an airplane,
Hmm.
or when things are good and when things are bad.
So, how did you start that journey?
Can you specify which part
Yeah.
of the
So,
journey?
so,
Like,
so you say you're open to talking about your mental health. So here I'm
mhm,
envisioning Lauren is a 15-year-old girl who's in high
mhm.
school, has a sheltered existence. Mom and dad are super nice, super supportive. They communicate when they make mistakes. They don't blame you for things that are going wrong in their life, right? So everything
Mhm.
is good. You have this like experience with this boyfriend where he has a seizure. He's in a coma for like 4 days. You're kind of spiraling maybe or something. I'm
Yeah,
not quite
for
sure.
sure.
And so even at that point, do you remember what it like felt like? Like what were you experiencing? Sure, your body didn't know how to handle it or process it, but what was your experience of it?
I mean, I think the best way to describe it was like loss of control. Right, is
Okay.
like I think being like a very like type A individual too, like there's so many things that I do in my daily routine to like mitigate risk and feel in control of certain elements of my life. And so I think like that was the very first time where I was like, oh, there is absolutely nothing that I can do in this moment to mitigate any risks, to change the outcome. And I am full hands off in this situation, full loss of control.
And that sounds terrifying.
Right, exactly. And so also like at that age too, when it's like you feel like you're in love for the very first time, like it was just such an overwhelming emotion
Oh
again
my
that my
God.
body just didn't know how to process.
Oh my God. So you're in love for the first time. You're in love. This is the one. And then suddenly this person has seizures and is a coma. This sounds like the
Right.
makings of a terrible romantic tragedy.
Right, exactly,
Like,
right. Could have been a movie.
yeah, absolutely. It's never too late. Um, so, so yeah, and how did you handle that at the time?
um I think leaning into my support system was, I think, the main pillar of being able to process a lot of that. Um, my parents were wonderful, dropped everything, came to the hospital with me, and we also like. Essentially, he got transferred to. So I lived in a city called St. Catharines. It's just outside of Niagara Falls, about an hour, hour and a half from Toronto. So he got transferred to like a more
Mhm.
serious hospital in Toronto. So my parents like dropped everything. We drove to Toronto, stayed overnight, etc. Like they were just so supportive of being like, "Oh, this is serious, and we're treating it as so." Um, but yeah, it was really the support system of like friends and family. I think that was I think the first time that I'd really had to like lead into that in like a bigger way.
Wow. Okay. And so, when did you start to think that you maybe needed to engage in mental health support more formally, like therapy or something like that?
My mom encouraged me in high school, I would say in grade 11 or 12 maybe, to give therapy a try. It was also covered because she again works like in healthcare, so like that was great. And so it felt like I had a lot of resources kind of at my disposal, which was so nice. And again, I know not everyone has the privilege of it, but I was in therapy, I think at I think it was maybe grade 11 or 12, to not only process a little bit of like what had happened with that boyfriend, but also to talk about like the emetophobia that I had also been, I think, starting to identify exactly what it was. And I think I'm not sure how
Yeah, can you tell us about
familiar
that?
you are, yeah, with metaphobia. Sure. So essentially it's like an irrational fear at its core of being sick, so throwing up and vomit. And so for me personally, it is more of like the anticipatory anxiety of feeling sick. And again, like a familiar theme that I feel like you'll start to see in me is like the loss of control. So feeling like it's a bodily function that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen and you don't have control over it. So it's very much the anticipatory anxiety behind getting sick, that kind of drives my emetophobia. And social media has been so interesting to see how many people I think struggle with this. And I, in grade 11 and 12, was kind of feeling very alone in this. And it felt again so irrational. And so it's like it's one of those things where it's like, why am I so focused and hyper focused on this that I feel like it drives so much of my day and takes up so much of my mind, but like, it's not actually a life-threatening, like, I'm not gonna die, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So it's like you go in and out of feeling clear about what it is.
Okay, give me a second. So, can you tell us like what? So, when you were like, let's say in high school, what would you experience?
Um, I would say it wasn't I would say I was probably, like, looking back at myself in high school and elementary, I definitely was, like, an anxious kid. But I don't think it was until I had that like hospital coma seizure situation that I experienced my first like panic attacks later on when I then moved to Toronto almost like just like a couple months after um that situation happened with the coma and the hospital. I had my first panic attack in my first year of university. Um and I think that was kind of what changed the trajectory of my mental health.
So let's can we? This is great. Thank you so much for sharing this. I want to. So you said that you were an anxious kid. What does that mean?
Mhm. Um, I think about the time like, I think about when I would go to I was like a summer camp kid, right, with, like, 2 working parents, and I would think about what I needed to pack to like have a safe day so that things don't go wrong, or like being anxious about the social situation of like and this is, you know, on the more normal side I would say of like who am I going to be friends with for the week. Like, I feel like that's like a very normal kid, especially like as an only child. I'm like, okay, going into this, I'm riding solo. I'm gonna have to go find a buddy. But I think about all of like the mitigation techniques that I was
Hmm.
kind of doing unknowingly as a kid to again have like a day where things didn't go wrong, whatever that meant at the time. Whether that be like so that I'm not hungry, or so that I don't have to go to the bathroom, or so that if I fall and scrape my knee, I have a band-aid type of situation.
Okay, so it sounds like you would anticipate all kinds of things going wrong, and you would start planning for them.
Yes, for
And
sure.
and what kinds of things would you do to plan for them? Like, how would you protect against that loss of control? How would you
I mean,
maintain control?
I think everything is was just like a little more simple then. So if it was like having a water bottle so that I don't feel thirsty, you know what I mean? Feels like the grade 4 version of like the mitigation things that I do now as an adult.
Okay. And so you'd carry around a water bottle, carry around a Band-Aid, and then it started to. So what was high school like in your head?
Um, feels actually quite stable, I would say. Like
Can
I
I can I just
wasn't
jump in for a second? So sometimes your voice gets kind of tinny. I'm wondering if we can try switching your mic input.
yeah, let me see.
I'm gonna check in with chat. Are y'all noticing that too? Okay, let's count to 10 for me.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, so this
4.
is way quieter, which is not bad. Let me just see if I
Okay.
can fix that. No, yeah, if you can turn yours up a little bit.
Yep.
Um,
Okay.
and then count to 10 for me.
Okay. Input volumes all the way up. So 1, 2, 3,
Okay.
4, 5, 6, 7,
Okay.
8,
Keep going.
9, 10.
Okay, great. Okay,
1,
I'm gonna turn.
2.
No, I'm gonna just turn myself down a touch. Chat, I'm gonna ask y'all to just jack up the volume a little bit because we're gonna have to try to balance that. Okay. So let's keep going. So thank you so much for sharing this. So what was high school was like similar in terms of when you were a kid, or did things start to change?
High school feels like in my memories it feels more stable, I guess. Like there weren't any standout moments. I feel like for me in high school it was fine. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I
Mhm.
summarize it. Like it was fine.
Okay. And so when did emetophobia start to what did you first start to notice there?
um It was, I think the very first signs of it were along the lines of like, I hope I don't get sick on this day that would really be inconvenient to be sick on.
Okay.
So like for example, we had something called ski club, and it was where once a week for 10 weeks in the winter, Canadian high school, we would get bussed over to like a ski hill to go snowboard and ski one day of the week, and loved those days. They were like one of my favorites. And so like it was the extra worry of like, oh, I hope I don't get sick on this day because I don't want to miss this, but there would be no reason why I would get sick, right? So it was like that irrational worry if there's nothing, like there were no indications that I would get sick, but I still had the existing worry of, well, what if I do get sick?
And what's your understanding of where those irrational worries come from?
I think it was, there was a, what felt again in grade 5 like the most high pressure day of my little 10-year-old life at a cross country meet, where I woke up that morning throwing up because I was so nervous for it. And I don't know if I had the flu, but I would hazard to guess that it was anxiety provoked because I was so nervous about this finals for this cross country meet. And so I think from that day moving forward, and it's so interesting because with emetophobia, people with emetophobia tend to throw up so much less than the average person. So like I can count on one hand how many times I've actually been sick, which is so ironic thinking about how intense the control of emetophobia can be over someone's life, even when like if you were to take a step back and rationally be like, okay, but I've only been sick 6 times in my entire life and I'm 31. Like that's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah. So how do you understand that? How does it? Why does it work like that? Right. So
It's so funny. My husband asks that question all the time. How do you understand that?
How do
I
you
understand that
how do you
as
understand why your husband asks you? How do you understand that all the time?
I understand that because he went into therapy and his therapist asked that, and he absorbed that verbiage into his own lingo.
Okay.
But how I understand that, I think, is just that,
That's funny.
like, I think it again just like highlights how irrational it essentially feels. Because, like, again, if you take a step back and look at like the actual facts, it's like, one, throwing up 99.99% of the time is not going to kill you. So it's like you're looking at that. You're looking at, okay, well, if I've only thrown up 5 or 6 times in my entire life, and I'm not someone who is prone to it, like, you know how some people, if they just like don't feel well, they can just go and make themselves be sick, and they're like, oh, I feel so much better, and they continue to rally throughout their day. Like, I'm just not one of those individuals.
Okay.
So it's like you have all of these facts that at the end of the day would lead you to believe that I don't have anything to worry about. But then the reality of like emetophobia is that you've created this pathway in your brain of having this constant worry of, what if I get sick? How will this inconvenience my day? Is this going to embarrass me? Is this going to make a mess in public? And worrying about all of those other elements that I think can be tied to it. And for some people, it's so severe to the point where they can't even leave their house.
Okay. So, um,
Sorry, I
how,
know I just said a lot.
no, this is fantastic. So when you have these kinds of thoughts,
Mhm.
what do you do?
I worked with an amazing therapist. So I've worked with I would say probably like 5, 6, 7 different therapists, at different points in my life.
Okay.
But I worked with a cognitive behavioral therapist, like a CBT specific therapist, who was so incredible in helping me walk back a scenario. So he kind of taught me this notion of like, what if, then what? So it's like, if you, okay, so like, let's walk something back to like the worst case scenario of, again, like this ski trip that I so badly wanted to be on. Okay, what if I do wake up and I am sick? Okay, worst case scenario, what if that does happen? And then what are you going to do? And so being able to walk all of these like worst case scenarios back in my mind, step by step, you'll realize that the outcome is never catastrophic. There's always options, and there are always different paths that you have to choose from. And I think that helped mitigate the anxiety for me every time I do start to feel that anxiety about, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario? And let's walk that back to what if, okay, then what? Okay, what if that happens? Okay, then what? What if that happens? Okay, then what? And I think it just helped. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I'm a bit confused about the walk back. So what the worst case scenario is where you start or where you end? So what
Where
are
you start. Sorry, I guess you're walking forward. You're right.
Okay. No, I mean, so I know it's weird. Sometimes we say things that click in our brain, like right.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
walking
yeah,
back.
yeah.
So I sort of get a sense of take a step back. That's interesting because what I do is, I mean, I call it playing the tape through to the end.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right.
That feels
So
yeah.
but it's interesting because I think what you said feels like it makes sense to me, but I'm like intellectually confused. Like walk it back, like take a step back, like move back, and then let's run through the scenario. Right.
Right. I guess it's like I would walk all the way back and then continue to step forward. Like
Yeah.
if we were putting it into like a visual, it would be like a let's walk forward and
Yeah.
figure out.
So what I'm kind of getting is that there's catastrophe in your mind. Let's
Yes.
walk back to the start of that catastrophe
Correct.
and then move forward through the what ifs. So here's the catastrophe. Where did this catastrophe start? Okay, what would you do if this thing happened? What would you actually do? And then if that thing happened, what would you actually do? And then it sounds like you end up in a place that is not catastrophic.
Correct.
Even if you assume the worst at every step, you still
Correct.
don't end up where your mind thinks you end up.
Correct. And then
Okay.
almost every single one of those like next what if then what if then what, I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. This also isn't that bad. This also isn't that bad.
Okay. That's very helpful. So how much has that helped you?
Changed everything. Like I love the idea of neuroplasticity in the way that we can change, the pathways that our anxious mind might go down. I think that's so comforting for me, and I loved learning about that. And so I think that I know that things weren't actually moving, but it felt like when I was able to put that into practice, things literally shifted in my brain of the way that I was able to process an anxious scenario in my mind.
Okay. And what would that do for you?
I think it calms. I think again in the pattern of me wanting to mitigate overall risk, it would help calm all of those nerves, all of those anxious feelings of being able to have a rational perspective of what the situation is.
Can I think for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a hard question for you, but you seem really
Oh boy.
knowledgeable. Okay.
Okay, hit me with it. Hit me with
Okay.
it.
What is the relationship between rational thinking and a calm mind?
I want to preface this with saying that I don't think this works for everyone,
Okay.
but I think I think that it helps me. Like I think that when I learn the science behind something, even if it's literally the highest level, simple top line of like why this happens, I think not only does it normalize. One sec, my dog is desperate to be lifted out of his chair. One second.
Dog has a chair. What?
I will say it's a shared chair in the household, but it's his chair.
How does
Um,
how does your dog need help getting lifted out of his chair? How does that work?
because he's just a giant baby and he can jump down but doesn't want to jump down.
Okay.
Remember how I mentioned the protective parents?
Yeah.
This is me continuing the pattern.
Okay.
The hard question.
Yeah. So, what's the relationship between rational and a calm mind?
Oh yeah. Okay. So I think that one, the first thing is that it makes me feel not crazy. It makes me feel like
To learn about what's going on in you.
to learn about what's happening. Yeah,
okay.
exactly. To like, again, even the highest level, again, I didn't go to school for any kind of psychology or whatever, but like learning to be like, oh, that actually does make sense why I feel like that when that happens. I think that first connection is nice to hear and makes it feel normal.
Okay.
Because I think so much of anxiety feels irrational and not normal, that having that little highlight of normalcy feels comforting.
That's interesting. So what I'm noticing is that there's a direct effect of, so when you are irrational, when you are anxious, you don't feel normal. And
oh my God. Yeah, when you feel anxious, you feel crazy.
what does that mean?
I mean, it just feels like I think anyone who's experienced. Okay, here's a great example. I had a panic attack once where I somehow the brain is just so strong, right? Like it's incredible. I had a panic attack that felt so severe that my spine felt numb. And so I took myself to the ER because I was like, oh, obviously I'm about to die. And obviously I'd go to the ER, get, my levels and stuff checked, and they're like, no, you're fine, you had a panic attack. But I think that like when you're experiencing anxiety, and obviously experiencing anxiety and having a panic attack, like that's obviously on a spectrum of the different sensations that you can feel throughout your body. But like when I'm having a panic attack and my teeth are chattering, or I'm feeling wobbly and like loss of balance, and you get tunnel vision and you have changes in how you're seeing the world, like you feel so disconnected from reality when you're feeling anxious that I think that it's impossible to say that like you could feel normal in those moments.
So here's what confuses me. That's so helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
But that's not what confuses. What confuses me is so when you're feeling so crazy, how on earth can you possibly feel normal? How do you get
so crazy?
How do you get from teeth chattering, spinal numbness to like I read something about neuroplasticity, therefore I feel normal? This feels like trying to boil the ocean with a match.
Well, I think like in have you had a panic attack before?
No.
I love that for you so much. Oh my God,
Yeah.
what an incredible journey for you. I love that. I think when you're having a panic attack, the only thing that gets you through is knowing that obviously you've got grounding techniques and different tools in your tool belt, etc. But like a panic attack is going to end eventually. And like when I'm mid panic attack, I'm not thinking about neuroplasticity. I'm thinking about, okay, let's ride this out. And it will end. I know it's going to end. And I would say that's kind of like the main rational anchor that I'm thinking about when I'm at level 100 of anxiety. So like totally get what you're saying. I'm not thinking about neuroplasticity. I'm not thinking about, like any of the testing I've done. Like I'm not thinking rational thoughts. It's I think simplifies down to like this will end.
I'm going to just process for a second. So this is incredibly helpful. So then what impact does reading about neuroplasticity? So if it doesn't help you when things are abnormal, when does it help you?
I think let's say panic attack level 100 is teeth chattering, feeling nauseous, tunnel vision, spine numb, like all of the things. And maybe everyday daily maintenance anxiety levels are at 20 to 30%. I would say when I'm in that 20 to 30% and I'm maybe approaching a scenario where I know that my anxiety levels are going to be a little bit higher. Like, for example, going on this bachelorette trip to Las Vegas, like there's drunk people everywhere, people throwing up at any point in time because everyone's too drunk. You know what I mean? It's like, I know that I'm going into higher anxiety territory for the weekend. So I think in preparation for that, thinking about the rational things like neuroplasticity or anything that I've learned, I think helps prime me for a successful or a hopefully more
That's
successful weekend.
that's so fascinating. So what I'm kind of hearing is like, do you play video games?
I had an Animal Crossing stint, but that's about it.
Okay. So one of the things that I like about video games is you usually have a lot of tools in your tool belt and you bust out some of the tools depending on what you're up against. So if you're fighting
Yeah,
like
I
a
feel like that also
yeah,
applies for like mental health. Yeah.
absolutely. So I've never heard it illustrated in such a clear way where it's like, okay, if I'm dealing with like, there's the baseline level of enemies that I fight, and then
Mhm.
there's like a moderate enemy, and then there's like the final boss.
Final
And
boss. That's panic attack level.
yeah, right. And at that point, the only thing you can do is just take it and tolerate it and understand
Right.
that it'll end, but that you've sort of developed a different set of like options for different levels. And then the
Yeah, absolutely correct.
two things that I would kind of think about there are, I imagine that the lower levels of anxiety are more common, and also that things have a way of progressing upward if you don't mitigate them properly.
Correct.
Okay. So that's so interesting. So it's because I've never conceptualized. So usually, like even in medicine, like 80 to 90 cents on the dollar that we spend on someone's healthcare is in like the last 6 months or year of their life. So we're
Right.
really, really good at very, very severe things. But the really interesting thing, and there's plenty of data that shows this, is that spending all that money on the most severe things is not really an efficient way to allocate our resources, because less severe things are far more common and actually impact people's lives way more than like, someone's high blood pressure impacts someone's life way more than a heart attack does. I know it sounds kind of
Totally.
weird, but because a
No, totally makes sense.
high blood pressure leads to heart attacks. But that's so interesting to hear how it seems like you've learned different methodologies for the severity of what you're dealing with. And
I think that's a great way to summarize it.
I think it's also interesting because when I hear people, when things don't work for them, I think this is a missing piece of the puzzle, because people will say like, okay, you're saying learn about neuroplasticity, fair enough. But neuroplasticity doesn't help when I'm having a panic attack. So they're
Correct.
looking for one solution that will deal with the most severe thing. Or what'll happen is, as someone says, okay, if you're dealing with a panic attack, the thing that helps me the most is this will end, which is totally fair. But then that doesn't help them for the 80% of the time when they're going to bachelorette parties, when they're putting themselves in high risk situations. So it's so
Correct.
interesting because I hear that, like, therapy doesn't work for me, or this solution doesn't work very
Mhm.
often. And I wonder if the missing piece is that this solution does not work for this problem. There's not a thing for panic attacks. It's like there's a gradient of different things, and you have to figure out things at each level.
100% agree.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's wonderful talking to you and kind of hearing about these revelations.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about emetophobia because it's just so interesting to see how many people it affects, and again, it's such like a different scale of severity. And I also have been on both ends of the spectrum of like how much it can impact my life based on like how I'm doing in therapy, and if my medication is at like the right fit for the what I'm going through in life at the time.
Can you tell us a little bit? You feel comfortable talking about medication?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on so I started an SSRI when I was in my first year of university, after I had that very first panic attack. And so I kind of I was doing therapy, and that was the first time that I ever tried medication. And for me personally, it was the combination of the two that were so incredibly effective. I think how I always describe it to friends who have asked me my experience, and again, I know it doesn't work for everyone and side effects are different for everyone. But for me personally, when I started the anti-anxiety medication, it like parted the clouds and allowed the techniques that I was learning in therapy to actually be effective and to be absorbed into my life and be able to actually apply those techniques that I was learning. And I think without being able to dial back what was like my resting state of anxiety until I was medicated, I wasn't able to properly apply what I was learning in therapy.
That's so interesting. So, my as a psychiatrist, I think sometimes the way that I sort of think about it is like, aqua aerobics is so sometimes people are in a situation where, let's say they have an injury or something like that, and exercising in a regular way is very difficult for them. And so what you need is something special to get you started. Right. So if you start with like aqua aerobics and you're supporting some of your body weight, there's less of a load on your joints. It allows you to strengthen. And then, kind of like what you're saying, it allows you to actually like build up the skills, and then you're actually strengthening. But the load against strengthening is so high that sometimes you need something to, as you put it, part the clouds. What do you mean by that, by the way? It's a really interesting phrase.
Like I feel like when you have that like if the resting state of everyday anxiety is very, very high, I feel like the way that I'm seeing the world is very different than how someone who is not experiencing anxiety is seeing the world. And so it feels like it's just putting you back on the regular playing field of life.
And how does seeing the world as so anxious, what makes that, how does that make it hard to apply what you're learning in therapy?
I mean, I think it's like if your heart is racing and you're not breathing normally, just say you're at the grocery store, right? It's like, and so that for some reason, the grocery store used to be like kind of an anxious place for me for some reason. And so if it feels like you're playing on hard mode to make the most simple decisions when your heart rate is elevated, when I feel like I'm short of breath, when I feel like I've got tunnel vision. You know what I mean? Like it feels like everything just becomes a little bit harder. And I think that I've heard that echoed throughout, so many different mental health disorders. People who have ADHD, it feels like you're playing life on hard mode because you're having to sort through the priorities. So I think when I'm speaking to like partying the clouds, it's like it puts your heart rate back at regular levels. It makes your breathing normal. You know what I mean? It's like now you're just experiencing it as the human body should without that higher level of everything.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you talk about neuroplasticity. I think we have good evidence that SSRIs increase BDNF. I'm not sure how much you've read about this stuff, but BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which encourages neuroplasticity. So one of the mechanisms that SSRIs probably work, we really don't know. I mean, everyone thinks about serotonin, but I think if you look at, there's absolutely an effect on BDNF, which is very well studied. So it's interesting to think about your emphasis on neuroplasticity and how it allows you to maybe use some of these CBT techniques and they like sink in more is sort
100%.
of what I'm hearing. Okay, that's so fascinating. And so do you feel, so sometimes people are concerned about becoming dependent on medication. Have you ever been concerned about that?
Oh, I'm someone who I really enjoy being able to experience life in what feels like, just like an enjoyable, I think when I didn't have my medication, right, because I eventually did come off the SSRI. I actually love to get your thoughts on these, but the tests that kind of test your genetic disposition to chemicals like serotonin, I felt like my medication after 9 years wasn't making me feel like how I used to feel. And so my psychiatrist at the time encouraged me to take this test. We realized that genetically I was predispositioned to metabolizing serotonin faster than the average person. So eventually I'm now on an SNRI, which genuinely gave me my life back. So there was about a 9-month period between the SSRI and the SNRI where I would say functioning at like 15% capacity. I would have never been able to go on a weekend trip. I could barely leave the house to go see friends that were like totally familiar, not new people whatsoever. So when my medication wasn't right, I was genuinely functioning at such a low level of being able to experience literally anything.
Yeah, can you say more about that? So when you say you couldn't leave the house to see friends, what was getting in the way?
Literally just sheer immediate panic attack. I remember my husband drove us to a friend's house, and I could not get out of the car. I was hyperventilating. I couldn't see straight. Like, again, like the tunnel vision, it feels like you lose your peripherals. I felt like I was going to be sick. And I was like, I'm obviously in no state to go be social. But it just felt, again, like total loss of control of how my body was reacting to what seems like a totally normal situation.
I mean, what sounds really scary to me about that is like I don't know if I've ever thought about it this way, but what you've lost control of is yourself. Like,
100%.
right?
And
So
it
no
was like,
matter,
it's like I had control, right, for all of those years, and
oh my God,
it'd
that's so
been like 9
scary.
years. Right. And so
It's
it's like
coming back
then
and it's harder and it's worse.
it's harder, it's worse, it's like the worst it's ever been. And so seeing a glimpse of that in that 9-month period between having the medication be right was terrifying. And so I think, to go back to your question about like being scared about being dependent on medication, is that I'm totally at peace with knowing that there is some kind of chemical imbalance that is not quite right. And if it likely, and I'm sure at some other point in my life it might have to change, but I'm totally at peace with the fact that to be able to function at a regular, what feels like, a regular person's life, I likely will have to supplement something chemically.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've done a lot of work in therapy, and you've just recognized that medication helps you just live the life that you want. And I'm not hearing
Yeah.
so much concern about dependence. I think the way that you're thinking about it is interesting. And that's the way that I tend to think about it, and the patients that I work with, when we reach our sort of healthy equilibrium, that's kind of what we're thinking about. It's just, what kind of life do you want to live? And is this in service to that? Which I think is the same for diet or any other thing. It's just a tool in the tool belt. And so you had some questions. You said you mentioned something about questions for me about genetic testing. What do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to get your thoughts on them, because I know that they're still a little bit new, and it's not the first thing that people jump to. Obviously, I know that it's typically something that gets reached for a little later on in the medication journey if things aren't working, to make adjustments. But we'd just love to get your thoughts on it.
So, do you mind if I ask you a couple of specific questions about your treatment history? So,
Yeah.
Were you on one SSRI for 9 years?
I tried 2 different SSRIs for 9 years.
And how long were you on each one?
8 years for the first one, and then about 1 year for the second one.
Okay. So, and then you got genetic testing. Do you remember what it showed?
Essentially just that the serotonin, the way that it was explained to me is that essentially like the pathway that the serotonin is being absorbed or accepted into my brain is normally this wide, but mine is this wide, and so it's just absolutely just barreling down that that pathway, and so I'm just absorbing it faster, hence why it's maybe not as effective as it used to be.
I see. So you're absorbing serotonin faster. I have to just think about what that means. And was there something in the test that led them to an SNRI?
I actually was the one, based on my own research, that suggested an SNRI, because so essentially for that 9 months period, they tried me on a combination of propranolol, which helps to mitigate, like, essentially it makes my heart rate a little bit lower. I'm sure you have a more scientific explanation.
Keep going.
And then also gabapentin, which typically I feel like people associate being used with pain. But I think that their thought process was, this helps reduce the overall overactivity that's happening in your brain.
Okay.
And that combination did not work. That was the 9 months of me not functioning at all in life.
Okay. And so then,
And
yeah, keep going.
And so eventually, I think the norepinephrine element of the SNRI, I was interested in trying that. I was like, okay, well, whatever. Like this test says that I maybe metabolize serotonin a little too fast, but the norepinephrine, I think, element of an SNRI was interesting to me, and it ended up being right.
Okay. Super, thank you for sharing that. So now I think I think I can try to answer your question. So,
Okay.
So you suggested the SNRI.
Yeah. So essentially, my psychiatrist gave me a list of things of being like, I think that these could all be good next steps. I think eventually, after the 9 months, I was like, hey, this is absolutely not working. My quality of life is so low right now. We have to like make a big change. And so they gave me a few different. I'm trying to think of the other one. There was another medication that's sometimes used for ADHD as well too. Can't remember the name of it, but there were a few different new approaches that they were like, here's what my next round of suggestions might be. You
Okay.
know, take a little bit of time to think about it and do some research and come back to me and we can discuss.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about genetic testing for a second. So we have, there are now tests that you can run that will evaluate the metabolism and function of various like enzymes and transporters, I think, in your brain. So as an example, so let's do, I'm wondering if I can, we're going to do like we're going to teach. Okay. Give me a second.
Let's go.
It's a wonderful, wonderful question. And I think it's something that people sort of understand. And I think that's something that doesn't work. I mean, that people are not familiar with. So let me just, this is going to take me a second to set up. I think I can. So I'm going to do this. So I think the best, let's do studio mode. Okay. So I'm going to go here. Okay, great. And then I'm going to do this. So let's see if, oh yeah, this is lagging.
Oh, someone just named it Wellbutrin. That was the other medication that they, I forget what.
Interesting choice. I would not use Wellbutrin in anxiety, but I was wondering if that's what they were thinking.
Yeah, that was one of the ones where I was like, that doesn't sound like the right fit for me.
Bupropion. Okay, is this, let me see if this is laggy as all. Okay, you can't see this, right? Can you see this?
Okay,
I'm gonna just ask you to do something a little bit different. I'm gonna ask you to pull up the stream so that you can watch what I'm drawing.
Okay, I've got it on my phone down here.
Okay, great. Oh, well, that could be tricky, but whatever. So just mute it because you're going to be hearing me, but I'm going to try to draw for you, okay? And if you don't understand something that I'm drawing, you just let me know. Okay. So let's talk about genetic testing. So your story is you're on an SSRI plus therapy for 8 years. CBT, we can talk about the other kinds of therapy that you were doing later, because I understand you tried a couple of other things. Then you had a period of what sounds like worsening symptoms. So what I'm going to do, Lauren, is we're gonna teach your case like we would in med school, right? So like if I was like teaching like psychiatry residents, I would present a case. This is a 31-year-old woman with a history of anxiety that probably started in childhood. I had their first panic attack in the setting of, and for those of y'all medical students listening at home, if you're trying to figure out how to present a good presentation, like how to present a patient, this is what I would do. I'm not saying that it's right or whatever, but hey, arguably I'm pretty good at this. And I did get honors in my rotations and stuff. So this is a history of a 31-year-old woman with a 31-year-old woman with a history of Probably anxiety symptoms starting in childhood, with their first panic attack around the age of 18 in the setting of a first major life stressor, who then continue to have panic attacks that are characterized or also with comorbid emetophobia. Has had started with an SSRI that was pretty helpful, also did cognitive behavioral therapy and other forms of therapy, that after 8 years of being relatively stable has worsening symptoms characterized by panic attacks, agoraphobia. So it sounds like it's hard for you to leave the house at times.
Totally.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So characterized by worsening panic attacks and agoraphobia, kind of severe debilitation, who then is switched to propranolol and gabapentin. Doesn't work, and then chief complaint comes in for genetic testing and asks, hey, what's the deal with this genetic testing? Is it going to help me? And I know that maybe you didn't come in with genetic testing, but I'm kind of making that part up. Does this fit your scenario like pretty well?
Genetic testing was in between the SSRI to the gabapentin propranolol.
Okay. So we're going to move that over here. Okay, so switch to, comes in with, gets genetic testing, based on genetic testing, then gets switched to gabapentin and propranolol, because there are a couple of genes that show altered serotonin reuptake, is my guess.
Mm-hmm.
When you say your brain absorbs it, I think we're talking at the level of the neuron. Okay. And so based on that is switched to a non-serotonergic medication, and then this leads to even worsening symptoms?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So now let's teach this. So I'm not going to make recommendations to use a medical doctor, but I'm let's understand how a doctor thinks about this, how genetic testing works, how we think about medications. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, let's do it.
So first thing is that when we look at genetic testing, there are all kinds of enzymes and transporters. So what are these two things? An enzyme is something that takes compound A and turns it into compound B. A transporter is we have a cell that has little gates, and then things like serotonin. Oh, sorry. So here's serotonin, and normally what happens is serotonin gets released over here and then gets reabsorbed into the cell over here. So we can kind of think about serotonin as a boomerang. So I'm going to send out a signal, and then I need to get my ammo back so that I can send out another signal. So I'm going to go collect my ammo. It's going to come back. I'm going to reabsorb it so that I can send it again. Okay? So there are different, and if we look at our genes will determine the level of serotonin that gets dumped out, the rate at which it gets reabsorbed. So if I have a very strong reabsorber that takes serotonin in very quickly, the amount that will be outside to communicate with my nearby neurons goes down. Does that make sense? Right? So I dump out 100 units of serotonin, and within a second, 60 of those units are gone, whereas in someone else, maybe only 20 of those units are gone. So 80 are still floating around. So and what we're interested in is the serotonin between our neurons. That's what really causes stuff to happen, okay? So if you look at the American Psychiatric Association, they have a guideline that I think they released in 2024 that basically did not recommend the standard usage of genetic testing for psychopharm. And the reason for that is very simple. If we take 100 patients and we give them, if we take, let's say we take 200 patients and we do 100, for 100 patients, we do genetic testing, and for 100 patients, we don't do genetic testing, their outcomes are roughly the same. Okay, so this is where propranolol and gabapentin is a really weird medication combo for panic attacks. So like generally speaking, the algorithm for panic attacks is going to be try SSRI number 1, try SSRI number 2. Step 3 is try an SNRI, or even step 2 is try an SNRI. So if you look at like the algorithm for even without genetic testing, what would have happened, I would say that a significant number of psychiatrists would have just tried you on an SNRI, like as a third option.
Wish I had skipped that 9 months of gabapentin propranolol.
So I think your case is a really good example of why just because something is new and hot gives us information doesn't mean that it actually helps us. So, and I'm not saying that your psychiatrist did a bad job or anything like that. Like, we can't use a sample size of 1 and say this is good or this is bad. But I think this is basically what the APA did. They looked at lots of cases like yours. They looked at all the people, and what they noticed is that when you get genetic testing, people get to weird, like, second, third, fourth line treatments, maybe earlier than they normally should. So, you know, propranolol and gabapentin. So gabapentin is like a mood stabilizer, has it's like an anti-seizure medication, has an anti-anxiety, like off-label, I think technically kind of thing. It's also used in things like chronic pain and stuff like that. So gabapentin absolutely is like a medication that works on the jitteriness of your neurons. And propranolol is something that works on your if I remember correctly, it's alpha blockade, beta blockade, I don't remember exactly. But propranolol basically works at the adrenaline receptors, or things like adrenaline receptors on your heart, on your peripheral tissue. So it's not necessarily like a solely neurologically active medication. So it works like on your heart. And the reason that we do that is because we know that panic attacks are not just in your head. They're also in your body. So we have adrenaline, we have noradrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine. These are all hormones that are flooding through our body, and they will trigger increases in heart rate, increases in respiratory rate. You're hyperventilating, your heart is pounding, you have tunnel vision. These are all due to like these not cardiac effects, but epinephrine and norepinephrine. And then if we stop the physiology of it, and what happens in a panic attack is there's a cycle. So I have a thought, and then thought activates my physiology. And then when I have a physiological activation, that then increases the thought. And so then this creates a vicious cycle where we're doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling until eventually, like, you just kind of shut down. Sometimes people will trigger like these weird dissociative reactions. You become hypersensitive. So all these things like spinal numbness, which like normally we don't even feel our spine. Like we don't usually feel our spine, right? So like spinal numbness is actually like normal. So there's even things like something called visceral hypersensitivity, which I'd wonder about for you, where in your emetophobia, I would guess that when it's active, there are normal sensations in your stomach which start to feel very dangerous, but we don't know.
Right.
Right. So maybe. So does that happen?
Yeah, I would say, and like I think that I'm very in tune with it, where I'm like, okay, do I feel like it's in my stomach, or is it in my throat, or does it feel like it's in my chest cavity? And so I've been able to, I think, do work there in terms of like being more in tune with my body.
So if we kind of go back to this like idea of genetic testing, is it helpful? Like on balance, the answer appears to be not yet. Now, the key thing to remember about some of this genetic testing is just because on balance, it doesn't appear to be helpful yet, that doesn't mean that it isn't helpful for some people. Mm-hmm. So for example, like, you know, you can make a good argument that, you know, if you got this genetic testing and the key thing is let's move away from serotonin, that makes like a lot of sense to me, right? So it's just the way that they chose to move away from serotonin seemed to be like not the best first step. And this is also where like the other thing that we have to consider in your case, right, is if I had a patient who came in who is stable on a serotonergic medication for 8 years and then became unstable, I think an SNRI makes perfect sense because we want to keep that serotonin on board and we maybe want to add a neurotransmitter. Let's start working on norepinephrine. And venlafaxine and duloxetine, which are like the SNRIs that we tend to reach for, tend to work. They're very effective at anxiety and panic disorders and things like that. So, the other problem with the genetic testing is that we don't really know. I don't know if this makes sense. We don't know what the connection between a serotonin transporter and something like depression really is. So there are some studies that show, for example, there's like a short chain serotonin transporter that is associated with depression. So of the serotonin transporters, one of them is shaped like this and one of them is shaped like this. If you get the shorty, then you have an increased risk of depression. So we absolutely know that there are correlations between some genetic versions of transporters and certain mental illnesses. But then this still begs the question, does an SSRI work more for this or work more for this? We don't know. So there's a lot that's basically missing where people will run these tests. We know how to determine which kind of transporter you have. We know how to determine which kind of enzyme you have. And this is where things get technical. And we know that this transporter is associated. So transporter 1, transporter 2. This is low risk. This is high risk. But just because, but then if we look at like SSRIs may be equally effective for both of these conditions. So then if we do genetic testing, it's not clear, like, because SSRIs can work for both, even depending on what your genes are. That's not always clear. There are some studies that do show that maybe some medications are less responsive if you have a particular genotype. But like basically there's still like a missing piece between here are your genes, here's the medication. And I don't know, I feel like I'm not doing a good job explaining this. There's a gap between the clinical significance of your genetic makeup and what treatment we use. So we can determine whether you're high risk, you're low risk. We can determine, okay, you're a fast metabolizer of this serotonin, or your enzyme that produces serotonin is like at a slow rate. We can determine all that stuff, but to bridge this basic science stuff of what is going on in your brain to this medication will work for you, there's a huge gap there. And one of the reasons there's a gap is like, how does CBT work? What is the role of BDNF? What is the role of mindfulness? What is the traumatic significance if we do something like EMDR or something like that? Like there's a lot that goes into panic attacks that is not determined by neurotransmitter transmission. But like there's just so much more to it. The way that you think, the way that the mental coping mechanisms you use, how does all of that intersect with this? We don't know. What effect does an SSRI really have? What is the mechanism of action through which an SSRI reduces panic attacks? We don't know. So that's why like there's a lot of like good information, and then we have all these medications, but there's like a huge like missing piece, which depending on who you are, depending on like who your clinician is, they can be useful. I've used them for some of my patients. I've not found that it's been like very helpful personally. But like it's kind of like a piece of technology that's in the early stages, which has not reached like general clinical use because there is not a clear benefit. And I think your example is, I think your case is a really good example of kind of why that could be. Where sometimes it maybe even, I've never heard of your situation actually before, where it almost seems like it kind of moves you in the wrong direction. But then that also gets to this like really simple thing, just really simple idea in psychiatry, which is we don't know, like every case is one of individual experimentation where we don't know until we try. And unfortunately in psychiatry, when it comes to pharmacologic like recommendations, it's kind of like you just try stuff out until you find something that works. And the good news is that we do have a lot of data that shows basically what sequence of things you should try. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, that
Okay.
was super insightful. And I think that's how I feel, because I think there's a part of me that is grateful that although that 9 months sucked so much ass and it was awful and it was literally rock bottom. I think having that perspective of understanding what my spectrum of, like, you know, the gradient of how I can feel with this anxiety disorder, I do think that there were valuable things that I learned. But yeah, I am like, based on the little bit of research I did, it felt like SNRI was the way to go, and that ended up being right. And so I'm like, damn, that 9 months was rough.
Yeah. So I think, you know, your story is like one that I think is really does a good job of highlighting just how much trial and error we have in psychopharm.
Sure.
And like, frankly, it kind of sucks, but it's like the best we've got. Like, we just don't know like what your individual chemistry is going to be like. Like, you know, maybe it picked up some genetic things, but we just don't know. And then there's all kinds of weird things that happen with medication where once you start taking a medication, your body adapts to it. Mm-hmm. So what are those adaptations, you know, like, and that gets really, I mean, there's all kinds of weird steps in between. Like, just because you have a particular gene does not mean that that gene is being used. So like, genes are dormant all the time. So you have these two transporters, but what is the ratio of those transporters on your actual neurons? We have no idea. So there's like all kinds of gaps, but I think it's a promising direction. I'm glad we're moving in it. I'm sure there are clinicians and psychiatrists who are more adept at using genetic testing than I am. And so maybe like they have better outcomes, but generally speaking, you know, as of about a year ago, we don't see a consistent benefit for genetic testing for clinical purposes.
Yeah, makes sense.
I was just trying to think about where we were.
I think also too, like the process of coming off of an SSRI for that 9 months was also tough. Like, brain zaps are a crazy experience to go through, and my psychiatrist was great in terms of like giving me like the proper, like, you know, offboarding schedule of reducing the dosage at such a slow rate.
Out of curiosity, do you remember what the offloading schedule was?
Let's see, I probably have it saved.
Because I think this is another really interesting thing where I think we probably taper SSRIs. We had a guy named Mark Horowitz on like maybe 2 years ago, and he had some really interesting ideas about SSRI tapering, and I've since come to really think he's onto something. But generally speaking, we'll like cut things in half for a while, but he has some ideas that we need to do something called hyperbolic tapering, but that's a different story. We don't have to get into it. It's okay.
Got it. I mean, like, I'm such a hypochondriac that I was like, let me even slow this down even further.
Yeah, that's so that may have been good. I mean, I think we need to maybe taper it because there are a lot of reports about harmful effects of SSRIs, SSRI withdrawal, SSRI dependence. So I think that there's, and it's like not clear how bad those really are. Like, there are a lot of like, since there are reports, it's not like people are, when we do more robust studies, it seems like the effect is not as bad as what people are reporting. So, and it's not that isn't happening to those people. The big difference is the SSRI withdrawal what is causing that kind of stuff? And that's what's kind of like, we're not sure about.
Yeah.
Because as a class of medications, when we do post-market meta-analyses on medications like SSRIs, they seem to be quite safe and quite effective. But there absolutely appears to be a subset of people who really has problems coming off of it. We just don't know how big those people are. And also what else is going on, because they have other kinds of risk factors and other kinds of comorbidities and things like that.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, can we talk a little bit? Do you want to mention anything else about medication or your journey there?
I think that pretty much covers my story, because like SNRI is smooth sailing right now, and so that's kind of like the end of the medication chapter, I think. And
so you said I know you mentioned this kind of in our prep, but like it sounds like you did CBT, but you've tried other things too.
Yeah, I did a little bit of EMDR. And then what does that stand for again, Dr. K?
Eye movement desensitization retraining or reprocessing. I always forget which of the.
Reprocessing. I think it's reprocessing. Yeah. Did EMDR for a little bit, which was okay, but I think CBT was the most effective for me personally. And then I also did a little bit of hypnotherapy, which was not for me.
How so?
I think again in the same vein of feeling like I wasn't in control. Um,
Mm.
I think as soon as I felt like I was starting to like drift into like the state where like it's supposed to start being, therapeutic, I started freaking out. And so I think that, I probably could have learned to push past that and eventually, navigate that feeling maybe more familiar. But I think I wasn't ready and it wasn't the right fit for the right time.
Okay. And when you say you tried to EMDR for a little bit, what were you EMDRing? So
Um,
so you usually
kind of just
yeah, go ahead.
it kind of just felt like a little bit of everything. And so maybe if you want to speak to more of like the
Yeah.
process of like the movement, I can give you my experience with
So
it.
so when I think about EMDR, so here's how I understand EMDR. So we have certain memories, experiences that when our mind goes there, trigger a profound physiologic response. So we'll have a trigger that then cascades into all kinds of things. So if I like see something, my eyes see something, and then that triggers activity in my memory circuits of the brain. So if I see like, if I've been bitten by a dog and then I see a dog, now I see the dog, my thalamus, my occipital cortex activates, my thalamus goes to the hippocampus, triggers a memory, that memory then triggers my amygdala. Now I feel anxious. Now I feel scared. That then triggers a physiological cascade. Adrenaline is pumping through my system. Noradrenaline is pumping through my system. So there's a whole cascade of things that get triggered by something. So if I recall a traumatic memory, the same thing will happen again. I'll feel like I'm there again. So what EMDR does is we're moving our eyes back and forth. And since our attention is on moving the eyes back and forth, the cascade doesn't trigger in the same way. So if any y'all have had a, trigger into a traumatic memory, you notice what happens is your attention gets absorbed in it. So when you start to have a panic attack, your attention, you can't distract yourself. Your attention goes to whatever you're focusing on. Or not focusing on, whatever you have to focus on. So you get forced into focusing on something. And as you focus on the source of the panic, that intensifies. Like now the memories start coming back. Now the amygdala hyperactivates more. Now the adrenaline is pumping. So what EMDR, the way I understand it, is that basically what it does is by shifting our attention and still activating a trigger, it stops the cascade, and so as it stops the cascade, our brain learns, and then we can get exposed to the trigger over and over and over again, and then it no longer triggers the cascade, which is when EMDR works. Because now I can go outside, I can see dogs, and like this whole like neuronal wiring, this physiologic wiring, has basically been rewired by accessing the memory while maintaining my attention over there. So it's kind of like, like if I have a dog that's scared of humans, like what I have to do is I have to like be very careful, let it come to me, maybe pet it very gently. And so we can sort of do this like physiologic retraining. So the thing that I was kind of confused about is like, usually I think about EMDR being focused on a particular traumatic event that we're then trying to reprocess.
So I think for me, and I think this is what's great about therapy, is that I feel like, for different parts of your life, there are different therapies that I think make the most sense. And so for me, I think EMDR was, I think, mildly effective to help reprocess some of like the seizure related trauma that I had experienced. So that boyfriend from high school, we then dated for another 4 years after that, and he had severe epilepsy. So I've probably seen 100 seizures in my life. So I think later on, years later, I was like, you know what? There's obviously a lot of trauma that I hold here, and a seizure is a trigger. So seeing it
Okay.
at like a music festival or on TV in a movie or whatever was reprocessing or trying to reprocess some of those memories that were connected to seizures.
Okay, I think that makes a lot more sense because I don't I mean
Yeah.
I don't usually think about EMDR for panic attacks. I think there's something similar, but it's kind of like not quite apples and oranges, maybe like apples and pears, where I think there's a
Right.
lot of like physiologic rewiring that can absolutely be very helpful in panic attacks. So how are things for you now?
Um, I would say the best, and again, I think that like because I have done so much work in the realm of like my medication is right, I've done so many different forms of therapy, I have the most tools in my tool belt that I've ever had. And my daily life is like my resting level of anxiety is quite stable. I know my patterns of, higher anxious moments, and my triggers. I know myself better than I ever have now at this point. So things are really, really good. I would say the best they have been. I think again coming from that incredibly low point of that 9 months, which would have been about 4 years ago. Um, I think like the juxtaposition of that really not being that long ago in the span of like my entire period of life being, medicated or feeling more in tune to my anxiety. That feeling like knowing that that was my reality 4 years ago versus where I am now are just absolutely worlds apart.
And so what is emetophobia like for you now?
I think the main thing is like the mitigation efforts, like the same way that someone who is maybe like I have a good friend who has migraines frequently. And when they travel, they sometimes feel a little anxious about getting a migraine because again, they don't want to like miss an event. I feel like the migraine portion of it is a little maybe more rational, and so it may be easier for people to understand. But it's like knowing that okay, when I travel, do I have my 911 medication? Do I have my plan in place for if this does happen? Because I don't want it to happen, and it would be a higher level of inconvenience if it were to happen at this specific time.
So so it sounds like you basically planned for it, but it doesn't affect you too much.
I think that in high stress situations, my pattern is that I typically almost always get through it. And then when I get home or I make it through whatever anxiety is, I kind of crash afterwards. And so I typically can try to mitigate for that routine and that pattern afterwards. Um, just by, being more mindful and checking in with myself across whatever like the higher period of anxiety is.
How do you get through it? Like what you just said checking in with yourself, but what does that look like? And what does the crash look like?
Um, the crash is what it feels like when you like finally exhale a giant big breath after something really stressful. Like just say you do like an interview and you're like really, really tense and like everything, your shoulders are up at your ears and like, your heart rate is probably elevated. And then as soon as you're done, you're like, and you finally like let out that giant exhale. The crash kind of feels like that. And I feel like I've gotten better at I feel like actually the more that I expect the crash, the less often it actually happens afterwards.
Hmm.
So for example, I shot a show for 2.5 weeks and we were doing like 16-hour days and I was the host and I'm like, okay, this is like a really high pressure situation where like I am very necessary on all of these days. Like there is no
Mm.
room. And obviously again, like if I were to do the what if then what application of, walking through the scenario, if there were to be a day where I was actually ill, like, would we be fine? Yes, totally. But like getting through that 2.5 weeks again was super, super tense. And I'm like, okay, nice. I made it another day of feeling okay. I made it another, like, okay, one more day down, one more day down. And then as soon as we wrap and we're done, I crashed hard.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to me to be related to emetophobia. That just seems like so. But I'm guessing that you're keeping the emetophobia at bay, and then that is very draining. And so when you don't have to keep it at bay anymore, the exhaustion kind of comes in.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, by the way, you're very good at attending to like what I'm saying, what's happening on my face. Like you change your words very quickly, like not in a bad way, but like it's interesting because earlier I said like, I forget, I said there was something that was confusing to me about the exercise that the CBT person taught you, and you
Mhm.
stopped using that phrase, even though that's what you called it. So like,
But I think that this will probably change the way that I visualize it. Like I think I had it in my mind mapped out, but like when I actually think about it visualized after we've talked about it now, I think it'll probably change the way that I like if I were to draw it. Like I think that our conversation has changed the way that I would draw it.
do you find yourself being very, very capable of noticing what other people are thinking, feeling, seeing? Like, do you feel like super
Yeah.
tuned in to other people?
It's exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's cognitively very intense.
Yeah. No, it's exhausting.
I think I understand why you're an ambivert.
Exactly.
so
It's like I
you-
need time to be away from people.
yeah. So I mean, but because I think you lift a lot when you're with people. Like you're not just chilling right now. Like I know you're like it seems like you're having a good time and stuff, but I can feel the cognitive intensity. Like even the way that your posture is like you're like dialed in. Like you're like leaning
I'm
forward.
just saying
Like
this
it's
is like a great conversation.
yeah. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm just noticing how cognitively like
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the cases where I really feel like I'm looking in a mirror because I'm super dialed into conversations, and so I'm noticing how incredibly responsive you are to. If I open my mouth to say something, you'll stop talking like right away. Like you'll notice when I have questions, you'll notice my facial expression. So it seems like you're super like tuned in.
I mean, happy to be here.
Yeah,
You know?
no, it's fun and it's exhausting. And I'm gonna hibernate after. I usually hibernate after I have conversations like this for like a few hours.
I mean, I'm sure you just taught a whole doctor lesson on the medication, so that makes sense.
Yeah. How very considerate of you and empathic to support my hibernation. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious. What do you think? Anything else come up for like anything that we've talked about that you want to talk more about, or anything that you want to share that we haven't covered?
I mean, nothing specific comes to mind. I mean, I like overall, I love just being an open book about my experience because I just feel like nothing bad has ever come from me sharing more details about my mental health journey. So like I just try to be so transparent about it. Like my husband and I just went on an incredible trip, and obviously the photos from it look amazing and it was so great, but like the travel day on the way home after socializing for 5 days and like being super highly active was like a 17-hour day with a boat and 3 planes, and like I had an awful panic attack on the way home. And so like I just love being able to share that part of the journey as well versus people just seeing the tropical vacation photos, because that's just not the reality that I live in, and I don't want ever to give that idea to the people who follow me.
Yeah. So I mean, this sounds like stuff that do you ever get a break from this?
What's this?
The panic, emetophobia, anxiety. Like, is this like every day? Is like, I mean, you're marshaling your resources. Like, do you get? Are there times where you're just like straight chilling and you don't have to manage this, or do you like manage this like every single day?
I would say emetophobia is something that is managed every day. I think that yeah, it's not really. I think a great way to kind of summarize it is that it's one of the first things I think of when I wake up and one of the last things I think about at night. And based on the distractions of the day, it's a periodic check-in with like the emetophobia throughout the day as well too. Like, how am I feeling? Where do I feel that? What else is happening in my day that will change how I might be feeling?
It sounds exhausting.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, so is this just something you're going to live with for the rest of your life?
I mean, I think it's I guess the honest answer is I'm not entirely sure. I think one conversation that comes up a lot with like within like the emetophobia community is motherhood and being pregnant, because a lot of people in their first trimester, you know, have a really hard time with morning sickness and being sick. And so it's one of those things where eventually, maybe through, you know, forced exposure therapy, maybe it will be something that changes when I encounter that chapter of my life in later years. So I don't know. I think at this point right now, it feels like manageable. And obviously, I think when we're talking about it, of course, it can feel mentally exhausting. But I think compared to where it has been, um, it feels manageable, and my tools feel within reach at almost all times. And I've got a great support system. I feel stable on my medication. I have the resources, you know, in my life to make it feel manageable. But yeah, the honest answer is I'm not entirely sure, and it's kind of one of those things that you just kind of take in strides as it comes.
So this is going to sound like kind of a weird question, and I want you to be careful about your content creator reaction, okay? So like, how are you not like completely destroyed? Right. So like, and I like, it's a genuine question, and please don't give us
no.
I'm privileged and I have a great support system, unless that's really what it is. But like, what I'm hearing is that for, you know, a large portion of your life, ever since you were a kid, you've been dealing with this crap. There are periods of time where it's been really hard. You've managed to build a life, but it honestly sounds like such an uphill climb every step of the way. And as I'm listening to you, I'm just trying to think to myself, like, okay, is this a situation where life being this hard is so normalized for you that this is just all you know, and so every day is a struggle? Or is there like, because I mean, it sounds so challenging. Like, it sounds like there are so many ways that this has and could take things away from you,
Right.
and yet
right.
somehow you're going on trips. It sounds like you're genuinely having a good time. It sounds like you're happily married. Like, you know, like, but there are so many people for whom this stuff is like absolutely crippling. Like, how did that happen with you? Like, how did you not get completely, like, how do you not just get exhausted and worn down day after day after day? And even when things are going so well, it still sounds like it's really hard.
It's not easy. I think that's like the reality of it. And I think you summarized it really well, is that it's kind of all I know. And I think it just does feel like my normal. I think also my husband has really severe ADHD, and I just feel like I see the things that he struggles with, and, you know, I know my own struggles, and his set of struggles are just so different in the way that he has to navigate and use his tools to have the best quality of life too with ADHD. And so it kind of, I think his ADHD has put my anxiety into perspective of just like, everyone has their own shit essentially, and this feels like just, I guess, my normal. And I think also too, I've made a valiant effort in protecting my own peace. So like, blah blah blah, support system, yeah, all that stuff. But I also am really good at putting boundaries in my personal life and how I spend my time, because I do think that it is incredibly easy to burn out, and I have burned out so many times. And I think it's probably just a combination of like feeling like I'm on this hamster wheel forever with this emetophobia portion, but also, you know, the career and the industry that I'm in, and being chronically online as well too. You know, those paired together, I think, can be a brutal wheel that is literally never ending on both sides. So it's like, then you put those together and you're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted forever. But yeah, I think it's just sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I think it's my normal, and I think that like the social boundaries of things have made a big difference in terms of how I spend my time.
What does that
And
mean
even,
practically? Like, what does that mean, social boundaries?
like, I know that if I go out 5 nights a week, whether it just be to the movies, for dinner, etc. Like not like go out and like go rage at like a club or something, but even just like socially. Like I know that my rate of burnout will happen faster, because I'm also thinking about what if I get food poisoning and get sick from the dinner that I go out to? You know what I mean? So like eating dinner at home versus eating dinner at a restaurant has an elevated level of emetophobia anxiety as well. So it's like balancing feeling fulfilled socially and making time for the people that are important in my life, but also knowing that it comes with the cost of that burnout happening faster.
So here's what kind of exhausts me hearing you is like it's not so much what you do, it's just that you it sounds like you're always balancing.
Always. Yeah.
And so that just is normal for you?
Yeah, but I also think that like I think drinking is a great example because like if you drink too much, you throw up. And emetophobia, that is bad, right? It's like so I think about that and it's like okay, well even with drinking, it's a balance of like I enjoy having a glass of wine with dinner, but I also know the balance of like drinking too much equals be sick. And so it's like I just feel like I apply that logic to a lot of different elements in my life.
Got it. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So you treat many things in your life kind of like drinking, where it's just a constant state of balancing.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've used that muscle a lot, so it's pretty swole because you do it all the time.
It's so swole.
It's so swole. Okay. So one or two kind of last questions for you. One is, why do you think you're so concerned about control?
God, if that ain't the overarching question of my whole life. I think control for me, like control in like the most simple form equals something good, right? So it's like control over if I study for a test, I will achieve good grades. If I put the effort into editing this video to the best of my ability, it will perform better than if I hadn't put the effort into this video. If I am in control of my diet, I will feel better because I applied the control to make the decisions that I know that I want to make. So I think it's the alignment of how it makes me feel in terms of like, I think holistically, but also from a validation sense as well too. Like it's associated with all things in my head good. And so when I feel out of control, that feels more negative. And so I think in the most simplest form, it's swaying to wanting to be in from the more positive perspective.
Okay, so when you're in control, things are better for you.
I think that's what I've trained my brain to convince myself because I don't necessarily think that's always true. Because I think that like some of the most unexpected things that have happened in my life have been incredibly positive. So, but I think that that's what I have taught myself mentally.
Did you have is there a time in your life where you started fearing a lack of control? Do you remember?
I would say it was probably the coma situation where I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be totally not in control.
And I guess that makes sense, right? Because that was your first panic attack, or it was around that time.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking. Do you have any questions for me? I ask this question and no one ever does, or almost never, because people usually are spent at this point and or their mind goes blank. But
I mean, have you ever worked with other patients who have emetophobia? Like it's always I'm from someone who has it. It's always so interesting to hear other people's experience with it.
Yeah, so I have never worked with a patient with emetophobia.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've worked with many, many patients who sound a lot like you. So I think it's just like in a different clothing. But when you describe your physiology, when you describe your thought process, when you describe your experiences, when you describe the karma of your life, it like tracks like very, very closely. And there are a lot of things that It's so interesting to hear your journey because I think you've done a couple of things. I mean, you've done a lot of things amazingly well. You seem to be an incredibly resilient person. And also, there's a lot that I think is still like missing when I hear your story. I don't know if that's actually the case. I'm not your doctor, you know, I don't know. And that's why I'm kind of curious because you've done so well and yet it seems so exhausting. Like it seems like it's like constant. And there have absolutely been cases. And the reason I kind of ask that is because I think my experience as a clinician has been that there's sort of the management and mitigation, which allows you to live a functional life. But then there's almost like, I would say on the psychotherapy side, it's like a little bit more psychodynamic, where it's like deeper, like what is your deal with control? And even beyond the deeper psychodynamic side, I would even call it spiritual, where it's like what is your, like this is like your life. Like it's not just your psychology. This is like the struggle of your life is this balance of control. How do you make sense of that? You know, how do you deal with that? How do you, in this world, do we have control? Do we not have control? How do we grapple with these kinds of things? The other thing is that when I sit and I listen to you, I understand that emetophobia has a name, but this, I've seen people who are in your situation where this smells and feels like OCD.
Yeah, that's come up for sure in other conversations.
So, and the really interesting thing is that like OCD treatment is highly effective, is very commonly missed by professionals. I think the average amount of time it takes for someone to have symptoms of OCD and get treated for OCD is 16 years.
I'm right on track.
Okay. Yeah. And sometimes it's even 2+ years of clinical treatment before people realize this is not anxiety, this is maybe not pain, that there's OCD underlying. So the things that I think about are there is an intrusiveness, a permanence. You are constant. It's the first thing I think about OCD is about obsessions, which are intrusive thoughts that are recognized as irrational. So you recognize the irrationality of it. So it's really interesting because I'm not saying you have OCD, but like, you know, it's clear that you've had very thoughtful clinicians, and I'm sure they know what they're doing, and it's come up, which makes a lot of sense to me. I think this is more for people at home where like the tricky thing about OCD is that, see, when we use the words anxiety or depression, and we talk about them as illnesses, there's a link between the subjective experience and what we call it. So if we have major depressive disorder, it feels like depression. It feels like a lot of depression. The problem with OCD is the words that we use to describe it clinically are not what it feels like. What OCD feels like is terrible anxiety and panic attacks.
Right.
But that's not, it's, you know, when I'm anxious about something, my thoughts are a little bit like intrusive. Like I get worried about things. I can't control them. I have thought loops, I have spirals, whatever. But OCD feels the same way, which is why I think it's missed so much.
Right. I think also to your point too, like I think there's a large part of me that believes that I just latched on to this one specific obsession, which is the emetophobia piece, like the getting sick piece. But like, had something else happened in my life at some point, it could have been anything. Like, I don't think it's specifically like so centered around like the getting sick portion. I think it's the control, and I think it's like the obsession, to your point. And I think it could have been anything. Like, could have been spiders. You know what I mean? Like, it just ended up being this one like pillar.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like there was any vomiting involved.
Yeah, minus that like one high pressure finals meet for cross country when I was like a kid. Outside of that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's also somewhat common with OCD, like where the nature of OCD that makes it so weird is that it's kind of like the opposite of trauma, in the sense that if we look at like things that you're afraid of, if you've been traumatized by something and you're afraid by it, then that makes sense. But what happens in OCD is that we'll have these intrusive thoughts that are not our experience. So it comes and it's not actually tightly tied to our experience. So sometimes people will even get like intrusive violent thoughts about like their loved ones. They'll just have images in their head of themselves hurting people or things like that. And it's not like you've actually had that experience. It's just some part of your brain is just producing these thoughts.
Right.
The two things that I get super curious about. One is I think you're onto something, or maybe the forums that you frequent are, where one of the ways to deal with something like emetophobia is exposure therapy, essentially, right? So we call it exposure therapy. There's another way that I sort of think about it, which is, see, the mind fears that which it does not know. So fear, usually, unless we're talking about trauma. So there's like two kinds of fear. There's one fear, which is like, we've experienced this, so we've learned that this is dangerous. But if you look at the majority of anxiety and fear, it's hypothetical in nature, right? So I fear that which is not, like, by definition, I fear like that which has not happened. Like, fear is about a future projection, therefore it has not happened. So what we find with things like anxiety, panic attacks, and even OCD is exposure therapy is very helpful. And the reason that we do that, and I think this is not just for people who have like diagnoses, but there's so many people that are in our community that are afraid of things. And the ultimate antidote for a lot of those fears is experience. So when we experience something, you can combat the fears in your head as much as you want. You can mitigate things as much as you want. You can try to plan for things as much as you want. But if you really think about it, the more you mitigate and the more that you plan, the less experience with the fear that you have.
Totally.
So one of the things that I found, which is so strange as a psychiatrist, is that people, will help people protect themselves from their fears. That's part of our job. And at the same time, I think one of the healthiest things that you can ever do in some cases is to really like face your fears kind of head on. And that activates a completely different circuit. So like when I'm anxious in my head, I play all these mental games and I fight with it up here, but I fundamentally don't have experience. The moment that I have experience, the way it changes my hippocampus, which is my like learning and memory center, the way it changes my amygdala, it is profound. So the moment that I live through something, it activates different parts of my brain and can really cause things to like calm down, which is what we know from ERP, exposure and response prevention, which is sort of a good treatment for OCD. And then the second thing is this loss of control thing. Like, that's also something where I've worked with people who, will kind of do some of the stuff that you're talking about. I'm not a great CBT therapist, but I do psychopharm and I do some CBT. Sometimes I'll refer people out for CBT. And then I sort of noticed that there's like managing, but with some people that I work with, like managing is not satisfying to me, especially, which is probably what's driving it. But also not satisfying to them. Like I'll have patients who, I had a patient once come into my office and I was like, look, man, like I can patch you up and send you back into battle. It's so interesting that you use the word rally, right? So it's like, they'd have this like negative experience over and over and over again. And each time we like fix it for them and then they're back, they kind of like go back into the world. But there's a difference between that and like being able to like just relax completely, like being able to have this problem gone, which I think is a dangerous territory to enter because it's not clear to me that that's even possible for everyone. And then if it doesn't work for you, does that mean that you're failing? Does that mean your psychiatrist is failing? Or is it just not a possibility? And at the same time, there's a part of me that sort of says that if you're like yourself, if there are people out there who are struggling with this idea of like loss of control, and this is where I think we really get more into the spiritual realm of like, there are people like the Buddha who sort of like discovered that there's a way to gain sustainable, lasting, and effortless peace. That's the key thing. It becomes your default state. It becomes normalized for you. And really grappling with some of these concepts of like surrender and stuff like that. I found it incredibly helpful in my life. I found it incredibly helpful for other people. And, maybe at some point walking down that path will be right for you, will be appropriate for you. I get a lot of like positive energy about like, this is a journey for you and you're moving in the right direction and things are like pretty good. I also love this idea of like getting pregnant and nauseous because I really wonder, like, I'm so curious, does that really fix things for a lot of people? Do you know? Or make things worse?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think honestly too, like even it feels like pregnancy, not pregnancy light, but like exposure therapy light. I have 2 dogs, and I think that they have taught me so much about not having control, and also exposure therapy to getting sick and experiencing again, like having that like actual fundamental experience of experiencing it so many times now that like when my dog used to, he's like the one that I've had since a puppy, he's 8 now, and so when he used to get sick when he was a puppy, like heart is racing, and I'm going through all of like the physiological symptoms of panic and anxiety. But now it feels so much different because I have that actual hands-on experience of what that is to love something that is getting sick and not being, not having that adverse reaction to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to get I mean, it's going to be wonderful, but also super scary if you do decide to have kids one day, because that just gets amplified.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm saying, where it's like having dogs feels like exposure therapy light to this, because we have a dog who has a really sensitive stomach and he's throwing up all the time. And so that's been, I think, a great exposure for me that has kind of, been forced upon me to be like, here you go.
That's cool. I mean, so it sounds like you're on your journey. You've got an exposure therapy light. It sounds like you're thinking about the consequences of pregnancy and stuff like that. But it's awesome. Like I really, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Like I don't have anything else to say. So if you've got other questions or things like that, we can absolutely go there. But like I'm just sort of noticing, because now I'm even noticing, like now we're like looking forward and like kind of what's next for you. Do you have any like last thoughts or questions before we wrap up for the day?
I think that's hello? What? Oh, my husband has a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you want to come into the screen?
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna scream from the side.
That's fine. Scream from the
How does
side.
a supportive partner help to notice and encourage with what we talked about today? It's so interesting. We don't know how to like be a better observer.
How to be a better observer? Are you a good observer already?
Yes.
Yeah,
Why do you want to be better?
I can be better.
Why?
He wants me to keep making dinner every night.
What does that mean?
No, you pointed out some really important things that I think are great to like notice, but not like, I don't know. That's I think that might be the thing that Dr. K was talking about, and like I want to be able to like when I see things in real time, talk about them, bring them up, be supportive.
Okay, I understand what you want, and this is strange. Can I ask for? Do you want to sit? If you want to be off camera, that's fine. But I have an answer for you. But I don't. It's gonna.
Oh, right. I forgot that he can't hear you. My
No,
God.
I can hear him. I can hear him.
No, he can't hear you in my output.
Oh.
Here.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Hmm?
Okay, I hear myself echoing. GG. Oh no, it's fine. It's fine.
No, you know what? It's
this.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to be better, right? Why?
I can't imagine hearing what I just listened to and not going, oh, there's no part I play in that. I can do nothing better. I should change nothing. No notes. It's such an interesting, just slightly different degree perspective of something that I feel like I'm aware of today. But like, maybe there is more there. Maybe there is a reason to encourage how we not run away from things that are so difficult on a daily basis for her. And there's no one closer and with her in those opportunities and times behind scenes to be like, hey, I feel like that was really difficult for you today. What was going on?
Okay, so I think a couple of things. First is I don't know your name. I just met you, but it's very clear to me that you love this woman very much, which is like awesome to see. So when we love someone, we feel protective, we feel responsive, we want to support them, right? So if my wife were going through something, I would want to support her too. when our kids are going through things. And I know it sounds weird, but like my instinctive reaction to you was like, take a step back and breathe. So this is not your responsibility. Like your job as her husband is to be her husband. And so I don't actually, I know it's going to sound crazy. Like I know on paper we could be doing better. Like I know theoretically that's possible. I don't know if practically that's true. So I don't know if there's really anything that you can, I mean, theoretically there are things that you can do, but practically I don't know if that's actually the case. That being said, I think that if I had to give you one thing, so there's like 2 or 3 different dimensions that she hasn't worked on yet. So one, for example, is rewiring visceral hypersensitivity. So we know that when people have, and this is where you asked if I've worked with people with emetophobia. The answer is no. But one of the things that I've worked with plenty of people who have some combination of fear of a physical thing, a fear of a physical thing, and a physical thing. So IBS, agoraphobia related to IBS, panic and anxiety related to IBS. So I don't know if this makes sense, but we use these terms, but the underlying mechanisms are shared, right? So SSRIs and serotonin is involved in depression. It's involved in IBS. It's involved, especially SNRIs. So SNRIs are FDA-approved treatment for chronic pain, for fibromyalgia. So for this weird mind-body crap, the SNRI works incredibly well. And so the fact that you are responding incredibly well to an SNRI and you have emetophobia, it's in the realm of this body-mind stuff. So there's a physical component, which it sounds like you've done CBT and stuff like that. It sounds like you've done therapy. But what I found is that 50% of mental illness is in the body. So there's an area of visceral hypersensitivity, which is kind of the root thing that I would call, which is like the way that your body interprets physical signals. This is something that your lovely husband cannot do anything about. This is something that you've got to figure out if you want to do this physiologic rewiring. You talk about neuroplasticity, physioplasticity. So this is usually the biggest thing that we miss in panic disorders, anxiety disorders, emetophobia, OCD, IBS. All of these conditions that involve the body involve a physiologic rewiring. This is also why mind-body practices like yoga and Tai Chi are superior to things like physical exercise, maybe even superior to meditation. I believe they are when it comes to this kind of stuff. So there's a physiological wiring. You can't do anything with that. The one thing, if you need something, so question number 1 is, why do you feel like you need to do better, right? So is it you love her or whatever, like that's great. But like I would take a step back. She said you have severe ADHD. So kids with severe ADHD grow up believing they're inadequate. Grow up, they think they could be doing better. So what I'm like sniffing is
you said you didn't know me. You know me. You know everything about me.
I know a lot. You'd be surprised. Maybe not. So I think that question, the reason I resist your question is because I think there's genuine love there, but it's also it's masquerading, it's genuine love. It is inadequacy masquerading as love. That all that crap is like tangled together. So don't reflexively give into it. Just because she's having a bad day doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Okay? Number 1, that's my reflexive pushing back. Number 2 is, if you want to help her with something, help her with the loss of control, right? Recognize that for the next phase of y'all's life, she's good, man. She says his loss of control is not to be feared. It is what my mind has been taught. There's so much separation between Lauren and her mind. There's so much separation between Lauren and her body. Poor Lauren is inhabiting this body and this mind. It's not who she is. She just lives there. And it's like a
lifetime lease. Yeah.
It's like, fuck. I woke up this morning and it's the first thing I think about. And it's the last thing I think about. And it's like all the shit is actually okay. The SNRI is working. I'm happily married. My husband loves me. I've got 2 dogs. One of them is puking everywhere. Everything, all of this stuff should be gone, but it's not. She's just inhabiting this space. I don't know how you're going to help her with this. I have no idea. But I suspect that the deeper we go, it's not your job to help her with the mental stuff. That's for her psychiatrist. That's for her therapist. She can go to yoga class. If you want to encourage her to do that, go for it. You should go too, by the way. The thing though that you can help her with is something about her life and how she tries to control her life. And what does surrendering control in her life look like? If y'all decide to have kids, if you guys, when y'all have kids, like there's going to be a lot of times where her tendency to control is going to be like front and center. Because I know you know this. So when she gets activated, she goes crazy. Right? And you're trying to tell her like, hey, like I know that we're getting a well-formed version of her right now and she uses all of her coping skills and shit like that. But that's like when she's at the 30 to 50% and the clouds are parted. You've seen what it's like when it's a cloudy day and there are thunderstorms, all that shit goes out the window. In those moments, I don't know exactly how, but I think there's something with the loss of control that you can really help her with. That all of these things, all of your worst, because she's got the foundation. All of your worst fears are coming true, and it's okay. Like, we'll get through this, right? So everything can fall apart, and we will get through this. This will end. This challenge will end. I have a feeling that you can be a rock for her, not for her emetophobia. That's not your job. But for control, a loss of control, things, the shit hitting the fan. And that's also what brings out the best part of you. So you have severe ADHD, except when she's having a problem. Then you're focused in. Your ADHD disappears. Y'all aren't a match made in hell. Y'all are a match made in heaven. Right? So like the two of you bring something together and like, so you're doing it already. You don't need to be doing more. You're doing plenty. And that's the direction maybe you can help her in. But that's not
my favorite assignment ever. No notes,
No
keep
notes.
going.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And like, look at, like, I know you try hard and you take lots of notes, but like, even with no notes and keep going, I mean, that's been the number one thing that has allowed you. I mean, I know ADHD is hard, but I suspect that no notes and keep going is when you become the best version of yourself.
True. Couldn't read my handwriting if I tried.
Great.
Thanks, Dr. K.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys.
All right.
Impromptu couples therapy.
No, not couples therapy. There's no conflict there. That's yeah. I mean, couples, it's more about him, I think, than it is about y'all. But okay. Yeah, I accept what you said. Sorry. Okay. So any other thoughts or questions before we wrap up for the day?
I mean, that was great. I feel like we can't end better than that.
Well, so I love your husband.
Yeah, he's great.
I mean, I just got such a profound positive energy from him, like just in the brief interaction. He's really, it sounds like a remarkable individual. So good luck with everything. Before we wrap up, do you want to tell us where we can find you? So like what channels do you use? And it seems like you're super open about this stuff. You share a lot of this stuff. So where can we hear more and learn more about what you do?
I'm primarily on YouTube, Lore DIY and Lore DIY Vlogs, and then across all the other social platforms, TikTok, Instagram, as well.
Okay, thank you so much for coming today, Lauren. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure it helped like a ton of people. So good luck with everything, and keep us posted on the whole. If you guys decide to have kids and how that goes for you, because I'm curious about it. But
Absolutely.
all right,
It was so great to meet you, Dr. K.
take care.
You too.
I'm gonna do this. Okay, take care. Bye. Okay, how was that, chat? Did we enjoy? Yeah, that was great. Okay. Yeah, I felt like something was missing until he showed up. Okay. There's a cool question about yeah, she's awesome, dude. Like it's so interesting. I'm still processing like how. So it's clear she understands this stuff really well, right? So she's like lived through it and learned the things that she's supposed to learn. And she's just so dialed in. Like, I'm sure that, like, she's got to be exhausted. I mean, she's just so sensitive. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, in a very practical, like, her ability to detect using her senses is very high. And you know, someone's asking about physiologic rewiring. So let's talk for a second. Okay. So, hold on. We're going to do this. Let's just talk for a second. I'm going to move you guys over here. I'm going to come over here. So, someone asked a question, how do we physiologically rewire? So, if you have a panic attack, or if you have a panic disorder, or you have generalized anxiety disorder, or if you have OCD, or if you have something like IBS or a physical condition like fibromyalgia, if you've got some kind of condition where there is a body component and a mind component, how do we approach that? Okay, so let's understand. So the first thing that we have to understand is that if you've got let's just take the case of panic disorder, okay? So in panic disorder, in generalized anxiety disorder, in something like IBS, which is characterized by diarrhea, sometimes vomiting, sometimes constipation. If you've got chronic pain, these are all conditions where there is a terrible cycle between your body and your mind. And this feeds both ways. So, for example, let's take the case of someone with IBS plus agoraphobia. So in IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, sometimes you'll have periods of like just random diarrhea, and like it's not tied to a particular food. We don't really know what causes it, but you can't really control it. So what happens in IBS is, you know, there's some kind of bodily sensation which then triggers the mind and then creates anxiety. Now, the problem with anxiety is that it actually triggers the body, right? So if you're like going on a first date with this person that you've been madly in love with for 6 years and you're finally going on a date, that is going to create nausea, right? So when we have anxiety, this creates a physiologic response. And that physiologic response is mediated by things like adrenaline, mediated by noradrenaline, is also mediated by things like your sympathetic nervous system activation, of which adrenaline and noradrenaline are pieces. But then we also see things like inhibition of the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is what calms you down, slows down your heart rate, slows down your respiratory rate. So there's a whole physiologic cascade. Okay? Now, the problem is that once we have nausea, once we have this anxiety in our mind, and then we feel anxious, nausea. So we have nausea that leads to anxiety. And then the problem is that the anxiety gets worse, right? So the anxiety propagates within the mind. So then there's another loop like this. There's like a second loop that is getting worse. So then I start to thought loop. I start to get into a thought spiral. So then the anxiety amplifies. And each time it amplifies, it is going to make my nausea worse. It's going to make my heart rate worse. It's going to make my respiratory rate worse. I'm going to become tachypnic. I'm going to become tachycardic. So this cycle is going to feed on itself. Okay? So highest concentration of serotonin in the body, number 1 and number 2 are the brain and the gut. Most common side effect of SSRIs is GI upset. Not necessarily nausea, not necessarily vomiting, just some weird stuff going on in your stomach. Serotonin is very important for your gastrointestinal system, peristalsis, things like that. Peristalsis is the movement of food through your intestinal system, okay? So when we're treating this stuff, and you'll notice that what's shared between all of these things, these are all conditions that have a body-mind component. So when I work with patients who have fibromyalgia and chronic pain, it's not just the pain that's the problem. It's that if you have fibromyalgia and someone is like, hey, let's go on a bachelorette party, you start thinking about all of the things, all of the struggles that you will have to deal with when you go on this bachelor party or this bachelorette party. Everyone's going to be going to the beach. What if your pain is bad that day? Everyone's going to go jet skiing. You're not sure if you can do that. So all of these conditions are very mind, very body. And when you have chronic pain, as you start to anticipate all of the problems, right? So now we're going to draw this in another way. So mind is over here. We're going to anticipate problems. Okay? When we anticipate problems, we are going to release cortisol. Cortisol is going to go to the body and increase inflammation. Is going to cause demarginalization of white blood cells. What does this mean? So at any given time, about 50% of our white blood cells, which are the cells that fight infection, are on standby. You can kind of think about them as reservists in a military. We've got active duty personnel that are patrolling, and then we've got all of our reservists that are hanging out in the barracks. When we release cortisol, all of the reservists basically come out. So our body is like, hey, it's time to get everyone. Now a bunch of white blood cells that were chilling become active, and they induce inflammation. So when we have this kind of condition and we increase inflammation, we have a problem, which is that we have this mechanism called, visceral hypersensitivity. So what does this mean? So we always have signals. If you close your eyes for a moment right now, you'll see that there's stuff going on in your stomach. You'll notice things going on in your back, maybe some tension in the neck. Maybe you have an itch somewhere. My toes are a little bit cold. There's all kinds of signals that my body is sending me all the time. But we have this part of our brain called the thalamus, which blocks these signals all the time. Okay? So I don't know if this makes sense, but if y'all have ever had food poisoning, you started to feel uncomfortable before you noticed you started feeling uncomfortable, right? So you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, but you're like, it's nothing. And then as the discomfort increases, then your awareness of it increases. In visceral hypersensitivity, the thalamus doesn't work as well, so we amplify all of the signals. There's no gatekeeping for signals from the inside of our body. So now everything gets amplified. You've got a little bit of gas, maybe you need to burp, but now this is a sign of, oh my God, this is nausea. So visceral hypersensitivity is going to increase the anxiety in our mind, because now we're becoming aware of all of these signals. As we become aware of these signals, we start to anticipate problems. Oh no, it's happening again. Oh crap, it's happening again. Cortisol increases. Inflammation increases. Visceral hypersensitivity. Well, if visceral hypersensitivity doesn't increase, it's a state. But visceral signals increase. And then you see the loop? So for all of these conditions, there's a loop between mind and body. That's the TLDR. Now the question becomes, how do we treat this, right? How do you fix this problem? And this is why I think that our outcomes for these disorders are really bad, because we don't intervene on this connection. So if you have generalized anxiety disorder or you have panic disorder, people will say, go see a therapist. How much training does the average therapist have about the GI system? Very little. Now, the cool thing that I've seen is a lot of therapists are learning this stuff because they've discovered that in order to effectively treat their patients, they need to move one step closer to medical doctors. Okay? So now let's talk about how to treat this. So, first thing, we're going to have psychotherapy and pharmacology. These are our bedrocks. Doesn't mean that they're the best, but this is what we start with. So let's start with pharmacology. We have SSRIs, SNRIs are like number 1 and number 2. Okay? Why is this? So we know that serotonin transmission causes... Okay. So serotonin, 5-HT, is associated with peace. Okay? Serotonin is associated with elevated mood. Okay? So when our serotonin, we don't really know this because we don't really measure spinal tap serotonin concentrations. But generally speaking, when our serotonin levels are low, our mood is worse and our anxiety is worse. So what we know about SSRIs is they probably slow down the transmission of things like anxiety. So one of the side effects of SSRIs is to feel numb. And the reason that we feel numb is because if we boost our serotonin transition, it kind of levels us out. If we have side effects from it, it even levels out our highs so we don't feel happy. Some people are unlucky and experience that. But basically, we can think about artificially boosting serotonin transmission will lead to a reduction in anxiety, will kind of numb you out. And when serotonin is produced endogenously, leads to a feeling of like peace and satisfaction, not pleasure. Now let's talk about SNRIs. So SNRIs are 5-HT plus norepinephrine. Okay? And norepinephrine is involved in things like alertness. So we're not quite sure. I mean, these neurotransmitters are like letters of the alphabet. Depending on what word they're in, they serve a different function. So dopamine is a good example of this where like, oh, no, let's just use serotonin. So serotonin is also in the gut, right? So serotonin leads to like, helps us with peristalsis. So it's not like serotonin is exclusively about peace and mood. It does all kinds of different things, okay? My favorite of which is serotonin is also a precursor, is the building block of DMT, which is endogenously produced by the human brain, okay? So serotonin is even implicated in psychedelic experiences. So SNRIs have something to do with our alertness stuff. This kind of like numbs us out. SNRIs have some action on our nerves. Something about the way that these work make these first-line treatments for things like fibromyalgia, and basically some of these like psychosomatic illnesses. We use SNRIs. So if you're someone who's struggling with any of these things, SNRIs are also useful. Now, there's one other thing about SSRIs. They are also first-line treatment for OCD. So if we look at OCD, OCD is characterized by intrusive thoughts. Now, this is important to understand. This is a separate mechanism from this mind-body mechanism, right? So we said that there's mind, goes to body, goes to mind. The thing about OCD is OCD takes intrusive thought. I'm just going about my business. There's no trigger. There's nothing wrong. There's no visceral sensation. And it just tosses things into my mind, just randomly. So what OCD does is it starts triggering this cycle just randomly on its own. We also know that SSRIs are first-line treatment for OCD, right? So this slows down the mind, slows down the intrusive thoughts. And if we look at these conditions, they will oftentimes develop an intrusive, obsessional kind of quality where now I can't stop thinking. So when we look at panic disorder with agoraphobia, so agoraphobia means like fear of leaving the home. So you're afraid of leaving the house. So if we kind of think about it, this becomes quite obsessional, right? So I'm constantly thinking about what's going to go wrong. What's going to go wrong if I leave the house? I can't afford to leave the house. With IBS, I've had patients who won't fly because they're like, if I start having diarrhea on a flight, like there's like 2 lavatories. Sometimes when I have diarrhea, I have to sit on the toilet for 2.5 hours. Like I can't do that on a flight. So this over time can develop an obsessional quality. So I think all this stuff is like kind of tied together is my point. OCD is a little bit different. Key thing here though is that we have some medications that work for this crap. Okay, here are some of the mechanisms. Now, second bedrock of treatment is psychotherapy. There are different kinds of psychotherapy. So let's start with CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy. We have thoughts, we have emotions, and we have actions. And if we look at this mind-body connection, I don't know if this makes sense, but these 3 things are what happen here and here. This part of the loop is these 3 things. Now, that may sound confusing, so I'll explain. So literally, when I sense something, I have a thought about it, right? I have an emotion related to it. My stomach feels a little bit queasy. My mind interprets. It draws an automatic connection between a visceral signal and a conclusion. Oh no, it's happening again. Suddenly, that's an emotion. Suddenly, I can't leave the house. That's an action, right? So the bodily signals have thoughts associated with them, trigger certain emotions. Emotions trigger actions. So if we listen to Lauren, what does she kind of say? She says that when I have these thoughts and I have these emotions, I stop and I do this practice of like playing the tape through. I think, okay, if this is the worst case scenario, then what's going to happen? How am I going to deal with that? You can literally, instead of this process being, I don't know if y'all have had a panic attack, but what you notice about your thinking is that it runs away from you. You don't control your thoughts. You can't argue with yourself. It just runs away. So CBT is the way in which we put the leash on our mind and we yank it back. And we say, hold on a second. What does this really mean? Do I really have to act in that way? I'm noticing this emotion. Just because I'm feeling panic doesn't mean that I have to run away. So basically what happens in CBT is we have thought, emotion, and action. And these 3 things will loop, right? Sometimes they loop like this. So this is how it works. So we stop this looping, we can interject. So just because I'm having this thought doesn't mean that I have to, just because I'm feeling depressed doesn't mean that I have to drink. I can meditate instead. When I'm feeling depressed, doesn't mean I have to drink. I can meditate instead. Right? So this is how CBT works. Bedrock of psychological rewiring is CBT. Now, then we have a couple of other kinds of treatment. We have EMDR. Okay, so how does EMDR work? So we have this mind, body, I'm going to use red here. We have this mind, body, like cycle that gets triggered and then goes to shit. So what happens is in EMDR, we have a trauma. And when we have a trauma, our sensory system becomes hypervigilant. We are looking for signals of danger. And when we see signals of danger, we are going to activate, we're going to activate survival.exe, which is our trauma response. Now, sometimes the sensory system, this can be a sensory, actually, hold on. So our sensory system, we can have like, a trigger like a door slamming or something like that, or I see a dog, which will trigger survival.exe. The other really interesting thing is that trauma also works on our hippocampus. This is our memories. And our memories become so overwhelming that they trigger a dissociative response. And when we trigger a dissociative response, this becomes a dormant memory. It becomes buried. And a dormant memory can become active and trigger survival.exe. Right? So I can trigger my trauma response through a sensory input or an internal input. The trauma response can be triggered from the outside or the inside. Okay? So what we do in EMDR is we purposely activate this memory. But when we activate this memory, our attention is on moving our eyes. We literally are just, I'm recalling the memory and I'm just moving my eyes back and forth. I'm just moving my eyes back and forth. And I want y'all to do this for a second. So listen to the sound of my voice and move your eyes back and forth. And what do you notice? When you move your eyes, maybe I'm moving a bit too fast. When you move your eyes back and forth, what do you notice about your mind? Like, what happens to you if you just go like this? And I'm talking to you, oh yeah, like I started playing Expedition 33. It's great. I have some hot takes on gaming. I think that FF7 is the start of the decline of the Final Fantasy series. And there are going to be two people who are listening to this. One person is not going to be doing what I'm asking them to do, and they're not going to understand what I'm talking about. The other group is going to do what I am actually asking y'all to do. Y'all are going to participate, and you're going to immediately notice that it's like your mind has like a line down the middle. Your mind becomes fractured. It's not focusing on one thing. And when our mind becomes fractured in that way, this stops survival.exe. Okay? So as we do EMDR over and over and over again, once we shut off survival.exe, then something really cool happens. Because if we look at our sensory system, the reason that our sensory system activates survival.exe is through our hippocampus. Right? So when I see a dog, my mind automatically thinks about the dogs that I've worked with. So this is truly the mechanism. And so when we do EMDR, we're working over here. And then the trauma response shuts off. Now, in a similar way, we have ERP, which is exposure and response prevention. Okay? So we have a cycle, we have a sensory input, right? Or a mental input, which trigger OCD.exe. And in exposure and response prevention, what we'll do is we'll expose someone to the thing that triggers their OCD. So if someone is a germaphobe, we will like expose them to some germs, but just tiny amount of germs. And then someone feels like washing their hands, and we're going to stop that behavior from happening. So normally what happens in OCD is we've got, thought, emotion, action, and these two are going to be distress and then relief. So what happens is every time I feel distressed, I'm going to act in a certain way and then I'm going to feel better. And then this pipeline gets reinforced. Because my brain is like, oh, when I'm hungry, eating food makes the bad thing go away. Therefore, when I feel hungry, I will eat. Right? Makes sense. The brain works by, if something takes something bad in your life, if you have something bad in your life and you do something and it feels better, you're going to do it again. That's why we get addicted to video games and pornography and alcohol. I feel depressed. I'm going to drink. Now I feel better. Therefore, when depressed, drink. It becomes like we're programming. Okay? So what exposure and response prevention does is really interesting. Distress happens, but then we do not act. And then what ends up happening? The distress gets better on its own. Right? So if you're a germaphobe and you expose yourself to some germs, you're not going to be stressed for the rest of your life. Eventually, the mind will come to homeostasis. And when it comes to homeostasis, then you'll feel better. And so what happens with exposure and response prevention is we cut out the action. Now the compulsion is gone. Now the hand washing to the point where my hands are raw and my chances of infection increase is gone. So the compulsions are oftentimes the biggest damaging part of OCD. So that's how ERP works. So we can also use ERP, EMDR. Some of these techniques can be useful for things like panic disorders, generalized anxiety disorder. But then so this is what we do normally. Then there are a couple of things which are going out of vogue. So let's start with psychodynamic. As we noticed from our conversation today, oftentimes all of these conditions have some kind of root. So really common is loss of control. I can't afford to be out of control. So I don't know if this makes sense. So all this physiology stuff is there, but there's some deep association in your subconscious mind of like paranoia about loss of control, and you need to be in control in your life. So getting into that deep unconscious, where did this loss of control come from? What is your relationship with loss of control? Why do you have to be in control all the time? If you guys watched this last bit that I did with Lauren's husband, you guys saw a little bit of the psychodynamic sniffing, is what I would call it. I'm sure psychodynamic therapists will say that I'm way off, which is fair enough. I do my own version of psychodynamic psychotherapy, which sure I've learned, but then I inject a certain dose of spirituality into it. Okay? So this is like this deep stuff. This is not about the pattern or function of your mind. This is not about the technicality of what happens in your mind. This is about the why. This is about the what do you want? Like what's going on within you? What's this deep-seated Oedipal complex, Jungian archetypal kind of stuff? Like that's where that stuff is. So it's like this deep work where you make some breakthrough discovery. And the cool thing about this kind of therapy is that when you make the breakthrough, it like sticks. The reason I love this stuff is because what I've noticed with both of these things is the likelihood of being like fixed goes down. Absolutely possible with some degree of CBT. But we're talking about like fixing, not managing, not mitigating. This is where this stuff really starts to come in my clinical experience. Okay? I've absolutely seen CBT therapists basically fix anxiety disorders. Panic disorders, you can use EMDR to basically fix a certain part of trauma. So like that works too. But what I see more often is exactly what we saw today, which is that we're functional. That's the goal of these therapies, by the way, is not to fix you, to make you functional, to remove the impairment in function. That's the purpose of psychiatric treatment. Not to make you happy, to keep the sadness from crippling you. That's what we shoot for. Okay? So this kind of stuff is great. I love it. Problem with the psychodynamic therapy is that it's not clear how long it takes to work. It's not clear if it'll ever work, and it's not clear if you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. So your mileage may vary when it comes to psychodynamic therapy. Has been my experience. I think that, it's effective. And good therapists know when you're in the right direction, when you're not in the right direction, you're chasing affect and all this kind of stuff. But like, there's a reason why CBT is like dominating, because it's a lot more reliable. It's a lot more time limited. So in 12 to 16 weeks of CBT, you can get some solid stuff done. It's not clear how long psychodynamic therapy really takes. Okay? Now, there are two other dimensions. One is, I'm going to say, spirituality. And so this is like my angle at dealing with this loss of control. Why do you need to be in control anyway? Right? What do you truly control in life? And this is almost a little bit philosophical. So there's a philosophical angle to it, but when I talk about spirituality, what I usually mean is some degree of philosophy plus some degree of practice. So if you look at the big difference between like Stoicism and yoga, what's the big difference? Well, I would say that yoga is a combination of Stoicism and Epicureanism. It's about tranquility and also finding the most joy in life. But the big difference between philosophy is philosophy doesn't come with a skill book. It doesn't come with a skill workbook. The concepts are there. But the big difference about spiritual practice is it comes with particular practices. Breathe in this way. Put your body in certain postures. Chant these mantras. And so it's kind of like you could say that what's the difference between kinesiology and going to the gym or being a personal trainer? So you can study kinesiology on a theoretical level and never go to the gym. And you can get a lot. You can understanding how your body works is very helpful. But if we look at philosophy, and I'm not trying to like dog on philosophy. So philosophy is way more than that. It's a system of critical thinking and things like that. But when we're talking about helping an individual, applying Stoicism to your life, what is the daily practice? So maybe it's journaling, maybe it's contemplation. There's some of that, but that's not a big part of the formal system, at least that I'm aware of. I'm sure that people who love Stoicism and philosophy will say that I'm mischaracterizing it, which is probably true because I'm not an expert in that stuff. This is what I've observed. On the flip side, if we look at some spiritual practice, there's no philosophy. So some people are like, all you need to do is meditate. You don't need to worry about the philosophy. You don't need to do jnana yoga. If you just meditate enough, you'll figure everything out. So they'll even say that. Okay? But this is where, when I work with my patients, I tend to take like this spiritual sort of approach, which is like, let's like understand what's going on. Let's understand why this is happening. Let's develop a philosophy for understanding it. Let's develop a practice to, how do we practice surrender? And I think this stuff is invading psychotherapy. Right? That's why we have dialectical behavioral therapy. We have acceptance and commitment therapy. We have all these third wave psychotherapies that involve some degree of spirituality. And their formula is the same. Someone who is a therapist goes and studies spirituality, and then they make something that is a combination of the two. Literally what happens in every case that I'm aware of. I have not seen a third wave therapy that is not developed by a psychologist who went and studied some combination of Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever, Eastern spirituality. Maybe there's Western spirituality in there, like Abrahamic religions. I just haven't seen it. Maybe it's there. I don't know. Okay? So this is the next thing. You have to understand, why is control so important to you? Can you learn to surrender? And what I tend to find is that people who can learn to surrender, they basically knock this out. And if they knock this out, some of these mental patterns will still remain. Some of these neuronal habits will still remain. But the juice is gone. Now all we need to do is let it wither. So this loss of control, this obsession around control, is like the water, the soil, and the fertilizer for the plant. And when we remove these three things, the plant will stay alive for a while. And if you choose to sustain it, it'll stay alive. But on its own, it melts away. You've taken out the root of it. Okay? So I think it's very effective for long-term sustained long-term sustained improvement. Last thing we're going to talk about, which people asked about, is physiologic rewiring. This is the part that I think is missed the most. So when we look at cognitive behavioral therapy, there are thoughts, there are emotions, and there are actions. And they relate to each other in a particular way. And we are basically rewiring the emotions that are associated with our thoughts, the actions that we take when we feel a certain way, we're rewiring that. We can rewire at the level of physiology too. So that visceral hypersensitivity, how do we rewire chronic pain? I'll show y'all. This is so cool. Okay? So in chronic pain, okay? Hold on. Let me show y'all something. I show something. Okay, I show y'all something. Okay. So, tactile acuity in experienced Tai Chi practitioners. Evidence for the use of dependent plasticity as an effect of sensory attentional training. Okay. Does anyone notice anything special about this paper? So this is a paper that is looking at how the somatosensory cortex gets rewired through... Okay, I'm not going to tell y'all. You guys can take a look at this paper and see if you notice anything interesting about it. Okay, y'all found it, right? Woohoo! Look at that. Look at that. Okay. So when I was... This is one of the like 2 publications that I've ever had. So when I was... in 2008, I was a research assistant at Harvard Medical School. And this is when I really started getting into this stuff. So we're going to talk about what we learned there, okay? So in the somatosensory, so if we look at chronic pain, here's what happens. We have this thing, part of our brain called the somatosensory cortex. Actually, let me show you all this. So this is what our somatosensory cortex looks like. So our, I know it's kind of weird, but our brain, this is the percentage of tissue in our brain that is associated with a certain part of our body. So like a third of the brain that involves touch is devoted to the hands. Okay, so this homunculus, this is a good example. So this is what percentage of the tissue in our brain is associated with which portion of our body. So there's a huge chunk of brain that is the face. There's a huge chunk of brain that is the hand. There's a very small chunk of brain that is the foot. A tiny chunk of the brain is the knee. So like literally like 80% of our somatosensory cortex, which is the part of our brain that has to do with touch, is devoted to our face and our hands. Okay? So that's why like you can't feel a whole lot on your back. There's a really cool exercise that y'all can do called 2-point discrimination, which is you have to do this with someone else, but you take 2 fingers, and you see the distance that people can detect that they're being touched with 2 fingers. So if you close your eyes, you put your fingers like this, you close your eyes and you touch your arm, does it feel like 1 finger or 2 fingers? Then you spread it out, does it feel like 1 finger or 2 fingers? And what you'll find is that the 2-point discrimination on your face is very sensitive. You can even have 2 fingers very close together and you can tell it's 2 fingers. This definitely feels like 2 fingers. But if you put 2 fingers here, you can't really feel that it's 2 fingers. It just feels like 1 finger. That's called 2-point discrimination. That's how you know which parts of the somatosensory cortex work and don't work. Okay? So now let's talk about physiologic rewiring. So in chronic pain, we have this homunculus. And basically what happens is some part of our attention gets locked in to some part of our body. So if I have chronic pain in my back, this part of my somatosensory cortex is always focused on my back. I can't stop thinking about my back. I feel my back all the time. There's no relief. Okay? Now, if we do a practice like yoga, what yoga does is when I adopt a yogic posture, my attention becomes focused. Let's say I do a posture where I have one leg this way, I've got my second leg like this, and I have my 2 arms like this, right? So I'm standing on one leg and I have my arms above me like this. When I adopt this posture, my somatosensory cortex feels this, and it feels this. It feels my arms feel really tired. So I don't pay attention to my hands. I don't pay attention to my lower back. I don't pay attention to my face. So chronic pain is when the part of our brain that experiences our body gets locked into a particular configuration and it cannot leave. It gets stuck focusing on the back. So when I do yoga and Tai Chi, it unstucks me. Now my attention can move to other parts of my body. Now here's the really cool thing. Attention and pain are also a vicious cycle. When something hurts, I pay attention to it. If I start paying attention to something, it hurts more. Right? When I focus on the pain, when I start to pay attention to it, if I can distract a child who fell down, they'll stop crying. So there's a cycle here as well. So one way that we can physiologically rewire with chronic pain is through shifting our attention to different parts of our body. So non-sleep deep rest, or yoga nidra, post-cultural appropriation by medical science, is another technique that does this really well. Body scans are another technique that does this really well. Okay? But it's not just this part. It's also when we do, so if we look at anxiety and panic, this gets complicated, okay? So this is going to get a bit technical. So, in a healthy person, this is my heart rate. And in periods of stress, my heart rate goes really high. Let's say my heart rate is up here. And when I'm relaxing, my heart rate goes really low. So in a healthy person, the range of their heart rate is large. So my heart rate can go up to 130. My heart rate can go down to, let's say, 60. Or heart rate can go to, let's say, 150. Okay? Now, say 150 to 60. Now, I'm going to actually change this a little bit. Got to fix this up. Say this is 60. Say this is 150. Okay, so this is 150. This is 60. Now, if I'm an Olympic athlete, my heart rate goes like this. Okay, so the peak heart rate of an Olympic athlete may be 180, and their resting heart rate can drop even lower, down to 40. They can be bradycardic. So do y'all understand that an Olympic athlete, their heart rate variability, the range between the top and the bottom actually increases. Heart rate variability, the change in heart rate goes up. Now, let's take someone with anxiety. So someone with anxiety has a heart rate like this. So they can still go to 160. The lowest they can go is 80, and they sit at 95. So their heart rate variability goes down. So what does this mean practically? This means that their nervous system is it's wired at a higher set point. Normal for them is higher than normal. That becomes a new normal. Their sympathetic nervous system tone, the baseline level of sympathetic nervous system activity that they've got, when they're walking around down the street, their sympathetic tone is higher than someone without anxiety. Their HRV goes down. The capability of their heart to respond to stress goes down. The capability of an Olympic athlete's heart to respond to stress is way higher. Do y'all understand that? So lower heart rate variability is bad for health. Higher heart rate variability is good for health. And this is not just health. Let's think about this. So if I have a bank account of $1 million, The capability of me to respond to a financial stressor is greater. This is a good thing. If my bank account has $100, the capability of me to respond to stress is way lower. I cannot handle losing my job. I cannot handle a medical bill. I cannot handle a hole in my roof. So when we have anxiety, our HRV is low. So it turns out that if you rewire your physiology, you can increase HRV. Right? So I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but the same heart that is responding to your anxiety and is triggering your anxiety can be modified by exercise, can be modified by meditation, can be modified by yoga. There are all these fancy devices that try to measure the electrical activity in your brain when you meditate. The best parameter, which is measurable by a device, which determines whether you are meditating correctly or poorly, is not anything relating to your brain, it is relating to your heart. The difference between if two people are closing their eyes and both of them are trying to meditate, the way that you can tell which one is succeeding on the inside and which one is not succeeding on the inside is their HRV. Good meditators have increased HRV. If you do yoga, you will have increased HRV. If you exercise, you will have increased HRV. And there are more detailed versions of being able to do this. These are just the general things. But when we're talking about the somatosensory cortex and chronic pain, there are certain things you can do to physiologically rewire. When we're talking about POTS syndrome, postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, we're talking about a different set of exercises. So with POTS especially, the asanas that we use are going to be different. They're going to be very careful, but eventually what we want to do is increase the blood flow in position of our head in relation to our heart. So we want people to lay flat. We want to do upside down asanas eventually. We want to do things like downward facing dog, Parvatasana, Bhujangasana, Cobra pose. We want to do these kinds of things, but carefully, because people they'll pass out if you do it right away. So you got to be careful. If you have something like IBS, a different kind of physiologic rewiring needs to be done. A rewiring of your gut, certain asanas for that, right? Certain meditation practices for that, certain even regular practices for IBS too. You want to alter your diet, alter your gut microbiome. So there's a physiologic change that can happen. Gut microbiome is another good example of this. Right? Arguably, that's not physiology, that's gut health. But so there are all these dimensions. And what I've found as a psychiatrist is when you do all of this, these conditions, these 4 conditions get profoundly better. Right? So I see like this Lauren story is like super classic. Like she's doing way better. She's living her life. She's functional. But like, that's good. It's really good. And it's enough. And I think there's a lot more we still have to learn. I think there's a lot further you can go. And when you employ all of these mechanisms, what happens to your panic disorder, what happens to your GAD, what happens to your IBS, what happens to your chronic pain can change immensely. So I think like out of these, I think chronic pain is the toughest. So I think chronic pain is like the clinical outcomes I've seen from these 3 are consistently excellent. This one is, for some reason, is tough. I don't know why. But definitely Tai Chi and stuff helps a lot. As do things like duloxetine. So it's like your mileage may vary. But if y'all are struggling with this, hopefully this helps. And like when we say, go see a therapist, go get treatment, this is not a substitute for treatment. I hope y'all understand, I am not doing this with y'all on the internet. I'm just talking about how this stuff works. And if y'all have a condition that feels intractable, that feels untreatable, it feels like I've tried everything and nothing works, there's a lot that you can do. And some people respond way better to some of this stuff than other people do. I've had plenty of people who have a history of trauma and they've tried like seeing a therapist, but that therapist is not trained in ERP or EMDR. And it doesn't work. And then there are people like Lauren who's like, yeah, the SNRI like saved my life. So it's about finding the right treatment. And unfortunately, that involves like a lot of trial and error. But anyway, I hope today was helpful for y'all. We've been running an hour over, which is totally fine. And yeah, good luck. And if y'all have more questions, let me know. One quick thing before we wrap up for the day. So we have something cool. Let me just see if I can pull this up. One other thing. Hold on. We're launching a okay, that doesn't work. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. We actually have, I will try to show this to y'all next time because I can't, hold on, let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, oh no, we found it. Okay, cool. Saved. Saved. So if y'all are interested, this is a little bit of a different direction, but we just launched hold on. I'm so ADD right now. Okay, so we just developed a primer that I want to show y'all. So, what? Not working. Copy. Let's try this again. Paste. Nope. See if I can find it. Okay, that's not working. Okay, we're gonna have to show this to y'all later. We just launched on the membership side, we launched a primer on the mind. So if y'all like if y'all like these kinds of perspectives, right? Where like today we kind of did this. So we did this for anxiety, panic attacks, psychosomatic, mind, body, and the appropriate kinds of interventions. We put together a primer, which is like a lot of our sort of a combination of our most important deep dive principles of the mind, which we've then stitched together. So we also have a 5-day free trial for memberships right now, so y'all can check it out for free. And if y'all like that kind of stuff, stick around, right? So the cool thing is that the revenue that we generate from memberships fuels things like this. So there's like my time and research and all that kind of stuff. We continue to make, we do streams and YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is going to stay free. But for people who want more, for people who want more depth, for people who want like a higher level of understanding, a higher level of application, the truth of the matter is that on the general internet, if you make that kind of stuff, no one cares. Yeah, I think my link is not working. I know you guys are sending me the link, but like literally when I go to that website, it just goes to the general feed and I'm logged in. So this is like, it just goes to home. See if I can find it here. How are people supposed to navigate to it? See mind fundamentals. Yeah, it just goes to, I don't know, we're gonna have to troubleshoot this. I wish I could show you all this, but it just goes to like literally the link is not opening when I'm logged in. And I can't find it through courses and I can't find it through, I don't know. Other people seem to be able to access it without a problem. But anyway, we'll show y'all later. TLDR, if y'all want more in-depth content, y'all want more application, you guys want more deeper dive stuff like this, check that out. We still have a lot of deep dive content coming out on the main channel as well. So it's really more like the esoteric stuff that we do a little bit more on the membership side. Depth into particular things like emotional processing, a lot of the skills-based stuff is over there because people just don't usually pay attention to that stuff on the main channel. So thank you all very much for coming today. Huge shout out to Lore DIY, and hopefully y'all learned something, and hopefully we were able to help. We will see y'all tomorrow for the World is on Fire stream.